Good morning, everyone. My name is Kristen Wong Tam, City Councillor, and I'm the chair of the Two-Spirited LGBTQ Advisory Committee, Two-Spirited Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer Advisory Committee. My pronouns are they, them, she, her, and I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to the fourth meeting of this committee. The committee secretary has confirmed that we have quorum, so I'd like to now call this meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. This meeting is being held using the City of Toronto's WebEx technology with members and staff connecting by video conference or calling in. Because we are meeting remotely, we ask for your patience with any delays and technical issues. Members of the committee can view the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. We have one registered speaker today on item 5, Gender Equity Strategy. I would like to request staff to keep their microphones muted and their videos turned off unless you are needed to address the committee. This will make it easier for myself as chair to see the members as we debate and vote on the agenda items. Members, please remember to mute your microphones unless you wish to question staff or speak to an item. If members wish to ask questions of staff or to speak, please make sure your video is on, raise your hand or unmute your microphone, indicate your intention to speak, and I will create a speakers list. Please note that certain interactive features of WebEx, such as raised hand, are disabled for this meeting. The chat feature has been disabled as a communication tool for meeting participants and may be used for technical troubleshooting only. Any chats you type will go into technical support staff who are supporting our meeting today. And of course, when voting on an item or motion, I would ask members to turn on your video, raise your hand to indicate your vote. If there is a recorded vote, you will be asked to state if you are in favor or opposed. Members, I want to remind you that although we are meeting remotely, we must also submit our motions in writing. The clerk staff are available to support you with these motions. You can email them at lgbtq2s@toronto.ca to assist with the motions. And although we are meeting in different locations and meeting remotely, the 2S LGBTQ Advisory Committee acknowledges the land that we're meeting on is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. And Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I will now call for declarations of interest. Are there any members who have a declaration of interest under the Conflict of Interest Act? If you do declare an interest, please indicate the item number and the nature of your interest. Okay. Seeing none, thank you very much. I will now move on to ask for a motion to confirm the minutes from our last committee meeting on September 27, 2021. Anyone who would like to move the minutes? Thank you, Susan Gapka. I have a motion from Susan Gapka to confirm the minutes. All those in favor, please raise your hand, indicate your support. Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. We are now going to proceed to consider the 7 items on the agenda. Before I do, I just want to, number one, state that some of the staff presentations were, I know, expected to be released at the same time as the agenda for this meeting. I apologize that some of those presentations were not released on time. I do recognize, even as myself as chair, looking for those presentations a few days ahead of time, I couldn't find them. So I do recognize that sometimes that doesn't give you a lot of time to review. I do believe that the staff will persevere to do everything they can in the future to make sure all the presentations are ready in advance when the agenda is released. So thank you very much, everyone, for that. The first item on the agenda is QS 4.1, which is the chair's report. I don't have any questions of my own report. It's a fairly straightforward report. If there are any questions of the committee, please let me know. Otherwise, we can just move to adopt and receive the report. Seeing no questions, I will move that chair's report. All those in favor of receiving the report, indicate your support by raising your hand. Thank you, and we can carry on. Thank you very much. Item number 2 is the 2022 Two-Spirit Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer Recognition Plan. We will be receiving a presentation, so we'll hold that down for staff. Item number 3 is the QS 4.3 Preliminary Service Plan for Transgender and Non-Binary Youth. We have a presentation coming from Community Resource Section as well as SDFA. We will hold that down for staff. Item number 4 is the QS 4.4 Actions to Respond to the Drug Poisoning Crisis in Toronto. Again, we have a presentation from staff. We'll be hearing from the Drug Secretariat. We will hold that down for the presentation. Item number 5, Gender Equity Strategy. We have a presentation from staff, so we'll hold that down. And we also, I believe, have one registered speaker. Item number 6, Equity Lens Tool Modernization. We have a presentation from staff. We will hold that down for them. And then item number 7 is the 2022 schedule of meeting. The chair of the committee has called for 2 meetings in 2022. As members will recall, our meetings take place every 2 months, so there's really not too much time before the election cycle begins for October. Are there any questions or any members who would like to hold this item down? Are you okay with the dates? And if you are, we could probably proceed to adopt the 2022 meeting schedule. I see no questions, no one to speak. Then I would just move that we adopt the recommendation. All those in favor indicate your support. Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, everyone. So we are going to head back to the top of the agenda, back to item number 2. And I would like to welcome to the floor Aretha Franklin, Chief of Protocol. Aretha, are you here? You can turn on your video. We're going to hand over the floor to you. You've got 10 minutes to present. Thank you very much. Aretha, you are mute still.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to say I wish I was Aretha Franklin, but I'm actually Aretha Phillip, the Chief of Protocol. That would be
sorry about that.
That's okay.
You can tell I was listening to music this morning.
I'm going to, if I can just get the capabilities to share my screen, that would be great. And while we're waiting for that, I just wanted to say thank you very much for having myself here today. My name's Aretha Phillip. I'm the Chief of Protocol with the city. My pronouns are she, her. I also wanted to introduce my colleague, Idalina Matias, who's here today. She's the Senior Project Manager with our office, and she's been responsible for leading many of the initiatives with the 2L LGBTQ+ community. She also identifies, her pronouns are she, her. I joined the office the day that they said not to come in, so I have never actually worked in protocol in a real-time state, but Idalina has extensive historical muscle memory, so she's able to answer any questions you may have on what happened before. I'm going to share my video. Please tell me if you can see it. Can you see it?
Yes, except for now it is in presentation mode. Thank you, Aretha.
Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you for your patience there. So as I was saying, so moving along. So first, as I said, I wanted to really thank you for having us here today. You know, we're continually consulting with community organizations in the community, and this really is a great opportunity for us to engage you, the advisory committee, and get your thoughts and feedback on how we recognize and acknowledge your community on the days that are important to you. So first, I wanted to talk a little bit about who we are and what we see in the strategic protocol and external relations. Our role is really about enhancing the reputation of the City of Toronto by recognizing and acknowledging days of significance through civic recognitions, ceremonies and commemorations. And we also work with communities as we do this, as we're wanting to ensure that we support an inclusive space. So some of the things that we do, we lead commemorations and official recognitions. So those are things like Remembrance Day week. We also navigate the Mayor's Keys to the City. We take care of, we partner around Pride Month. So there's several different events and ceremonies that we navigate. We also work with other divisions around facilitating international relations and diplomacy. So we support international trade missions, inbound and outbound. and support the mayor in his role in their role as the chief executive officer and the head of council. We also issue ceremonial documents. If any of you have ever done that through an organization, where we provide letters of greeting, congratulatory scrolls if you're celebrating milestones, and that we do that for significant milestones for residents and communities. So this year we're trying to get ahead of it, and we're working on our 2022 community recognition work plan. And one of the things that we wanted to come to you to is to really talk about, what are we currently recognizing in the 2S LGBTQ+ community, and looking at also identifying what are some additional opportunities. Could there be some things that we are potentially missing in that discussion? Sorry, I'm having some challenges here. So over several years, we've heard from different community members about the need to provide further awareness and education and support. And we're really looking at this from a recognition perspective and wanting to understand better what is important to the community, as well as I mentioned, what are the additional opportunities, and whether that's celebration, whether that's commemoration of lives lost, if this is about awareness of the need to eliminate phobia. I think we're really just looking to be more intentional. A large part of protocol, in my perspective, is around milestones and recognizing these milestones. And when we look back 10, 20 to 30 years, I really want to ensure that there's an accurate reflection of the Toronto we were at that time and the things that we identified as being important to us. And again, coming to you as subject matter experts, we've consulted with other communities, other community members. We also want to make sure that we hear from you and be able to help prioritize the scope and scale of the recognition efforts, considerably, obviously, giving the committee's mandate. So what are we here to discuss today? A couple of things. We want to share with you the current dates that we have in our calendar for 2022. We want to identify, is there any dates that are missing that are important to the community? We know there's lots of dates, and what are the most important? And how do we prioritize those dates? Other pieces, how can we meaningfully more?
I'm hearing that it might be us in the committee room that is having the trouble then. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. In that case, Aretha, why don't you just conclude your presentation when you're ready, and I will work with IT staff to fix our problem on this end. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, no worries. These days, you never know whose it is. Okay. So those are the things that we sort of wanted to discuss today and get your input. And this is evolving. This is the first stage in a series of conversations. So I just wanted to let you know that this is a preliminary. We are going out to all the CABs, the council advisory bodies, to ask them the same things, because we want to make sure that we are getting the input and making sure that we are doing the right things. So what are the current dates in our calendar? So traditionally, we have done a series of events. The first one that we have done a partnership is around Pride Month, where we have the rainbow and transgender flag raising. We have partnered with Pride Toronto, and we want to know if there's others that we should do. So we do Pride Month. So we do generally, typically around these things, we do flag raisings, we do proclamations. Next year's the 30th anniversary of the first rainbow flag raising by the city in 1992. So we definitely want to think about how we can what we should be thinking about in terms of that particular recognition. We have also, in terms of our Pride Month, because it's the city has had more of a role in that particular one, is that we really look both internally and externally. So looking at how we can also engage our staff at the city, the staff of 33,000 people. So we create staff resources, we engage the staff through our Employee Pride Network. And we also have quite a bit of presence on social media, where we do some storytelling and we engage with various social media channels. But we're always looking at ways to enhance that program. The other days that we also support, these ones are ones that are community led. They've been requested by various community organizations, is the International Transgender Day of Visibility. We have the International Day of Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. We also have Transgender Day of Remembrance on November 30th. World AIDS Day on December 1. Now we know that there are probably several more days that we're probably missing, and we definitely like to hear about those, and we can talk a little bit about that. Okay. So what are the various types of recognition? So we kind of have these in sort of two buckets, one being ceremonial, which is the more celebratory type of engagements, and then we have commemorative. So currently in ceremonial, we do flag raisings. As I mentioned, the mayor will do proclamations. We've lit the Toronto sign. And then we have commemorative, which tend to be a little bit more about marking tragedies or things, deaths and those types of things. And those, we've done things, we have a peace garden, which we would love to be able to enable, which is more about lighting of candles. We've looked at doing vigils, wreath laying, and flower laying. And, you know, people tend to go immediately to the flag raisings, but we want to also identify that there's different ways of which we can do things in ways which might be more appropriate for whatever day that we are flagging. And also making sure, like, what we're doing, is it meaningful to the community? Is that having the impact that they're looking for in whatever the day that they're looking to recognize? The next thing I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about is just sort of variations of the rainbow flag. We've also noticed that there's been an evolving trend to create different renditions of the rainbow flag. As we know, as many, obviously the original flag has 8 stripes, which then became 6. And that became sort of a brand around Pride Month and other LGBTQ plus events. But we have seen other organizations that have made a decision to adopt other flags. So the University of Toronto has adopted a more color, more pride flag, which they, after some community consultations, felt better reflected the community. We've also seen another flag with a progress flag, which identifies the same sort of view as the University of Toronto. And then we've also seen the one with the 2 spirit symbol on top of the rainbow flag. So wanting to get your sense of that, especially as we look at the 30-year anniversary. Is this the time to look at the flag? Should we be making any changes to it? And what are you hearing from the communities that you represent? And, you know, not only have we raised the rainbow flag, I wanted to also add that we have also put them on the crosswalks. We've had decals on our city divisions during Pride Month. Now, we know probably, and we have heard that many feel strongly about the 6-stripe flag, because these flags were not intended at the beginning to reflect a racial identity, but more about spiritual and positive meanings. But, you know, I think that's a conversation to have, is how where we sit with that now, and where people feel it should be going or not going. Right now, currently when we launched Pride Month, we have flown the bisexual flag. Traditionally, we have also flown the transgender flag, but we have received some feedback that perhaps we should be looking at placing all of the flags that represent the various communities. So fly the rainbow flag, but on other poles, temporary poles during that month, to have flags that represent the other communities. So I'd love to get your feedback on that. The other thing, other flag raising. So again, are there other flags that we should be flying during Pride Month? And I was just mentioning that. We do have not-for-profit organizations, our community orgs are allowed, can request a flag at any time through our portal. That's a year-round. We don't want to singularly say it's only for June. So if there's any other flags, we would definitely like to hear that. And flags are raised based on the requests that we receive from the community. The next thing I mentioned earlier on is opportunities for partnership. You know, we have led some of the engagements. Community organizations have led a vast majority, and I'm of the belief that things should be community-led as much as possible. But then there's also the opportunities for partnership in between, which we're really open to. We don't have to lead everything, but I just wanted to alert you to the fact that we are open for that and looking to hear and asking you to share that with your community members, to reach out to us and let us know about how they'd like to be recognized. And, you know, so that's, and these are some of the community partners that we've worked with. Pride 19, Pride Toronto, Toronto Trans Alliance, Toronto Peace Flag, and we've received requests from many of them for flag raising and proclamations, but I know that those aren't the only community groups. I also know we also want to be looking at intersectionality, so there's that other layer. And I think there's more that we could be doing, and we just want to make sure that people are aware of the opportunities to come to us for recognition. And I think that's sort of the last thing that I'll say. And I just want to say thank you so much for listening to us, and just wanting to know if there's any questions and maybe how we can navigate that conversation. So thank you.
Aretha, thank you very much for your presentation. And just so you know, your audio came in much clearer after we made some adjustments, I believe, in the room. So thank you. If I can have the screen back so I can see the faces of the members. Members, if you have any questions for Aretha, this is a great time for you to raise your hand. Let me know what those questions are. And I think what I will do, just because we received some feedback that you want to be able to sort of be as fluid as possible in the room, so yeah, a little bit more dynamic. I will also suggest that this is a good time for us to provide some comments. So it's a combination of questions and comments. You've got 5 minutes to blend it together. Okay, the first, I'm just going to build a speakers list, so thank you. Just be patient with me. I see Laura's hand, Leslie, thank you, and Susan, sorry, anyone else? Ranjit, thank you, Ranjit, and then Lori. Fantastic. Okay, so the first round goes to Laura. Go ahead, please, Laura.
Hi, and just an introduction. My name's Laura. I go she, her. I'm identified as Two-Spirit, and I'm a member of the Wampanoag First Nation. So my positionality there. First, on the flag, my preference is to the Progress flag. That's the one I've been finding my community and my age group identifies the most with. I would stay away from the Two-Spirit flag currently. The reason for that is we're still a group of folks identifying and ourselves, and that symbol that's currently used is very specific to one group and not necessarily identifies across the board. It's actually very specific to Toronto though, so you can choose if that means something extra for us. So that's that one. It's just, I think it's still an evolving iconography that's not quite set yet. When it does, I would say, with us, I always say this, elders and youth always need to be involved. So if you are doing consultations, elders and youth in our teachings fly closer to the creators. They have better input than someone like me who's got my feet on the ground right now. So just make sure they're involved in the consultation. And then the other piece that I was going to say around days, I think the days you've identified honestly are good days without then going kind of off into the weeds of this day, end of this day, end of this day, end of this day, which we can do if we want to go down that line. But what I would say is that there is a lot of homophobia, transphobia, in our communities, and that's it's something we're working on. It's because of colonization, it's because of the nature of things, and I would say that I would love it if on things like Indigenous Peoples Day, like during Indigenous Peoples Month, I would extend that to something like Black Heritage Month, that there is some time dedicated to us LGBTQ people and recognizing that intersectionality and making sure that we're not just on the days, but we're weaved throughout, because really our community is weaved throughout all communities. Yes. And so just making sure that they interact with each other, that they're featured together so that they're, we're there, we're highlighted, we're not just isolated into little days as well. Thank you.
Fantastic, Laura. Thank you. Next person to speak, to question, Leslie. Leslie, you're still on mute. Thank you.
Leslie Leacam, Gender Mysterious. Thank you for your presentation, Aretha. I wish you were Aretha Franklin.
Me too.
And I just want to echo what Laura said about definitely including Two-Spirit people and youth and queer seniors. Queer seniors are always forgotten. So please include us. And I really like the idea of what Laura said about the intersectionality piece. interweaving it with all the other different days and months that are recognized. And my other bone of contention, and I've gone to my city councilor about this, I would like to see the Progress rainbow flag in other neighborhoods other than Church and Wellesley. And the reason, especially in my neighborhood, I am a Christie and St. Clair neighborhood, so you will know who my city councilor is. I have had an ongoing heated discussion with him about why it's necessary to have these flags in other parts of the city, because we live in other parts of the city. And the homophobia in my neighborhood is not great. Even my neighbor that I'm next door to has been very unkind and very unpleasant to me. Adding on top of that, the racism that I have to put up with, and then the homophobia and the lesbophobia. So there are many of us living throughout the city. There's a high population of two-spirit, queer, and trans folks living in my neighborhood, because I know many of us, and I see us on the streets. So it would be great if you could set up some kind of an advisory committee about putting the street flags, like the crosswalks, in different parts of the city, because they are so necessary. So that connects to what Laura was saying. So not only interweaving it in the different heritage months, but also putting it in different parts of the city, so people know we live everywhere in the city. We have a very strong presence. We spend money, you know, we support businesses, but more importantly, to know that we are part of the fabric of the GTA. That's so crucial. And I'm more than happy to work with you to get one in my neighborhood. And my wonderful MPP, Jill Andrew, and I are going to be working on this together with you. So you can get my information from Janice Alvarez. So thank you for your presentation. I learned a lot from it. I didn't know what the background was to, you know, how these things happen.
Leslie, thank you very much for your comments. I just want to say that I've also added Monica to the speakers list. So while I have everyone's wonderful faces on my screen, is there anyone who I have not added yet but would like to be added? Okay, fantastic. Terrence, thank you. Okay, so next one to question and to speak is Susan.
Good morning, I'm Susan Gapka. Use she and her pronouns. Elle français, s'il vous plaît. Glad to be here. So I made a few notes. I have a list of important dates that I've made for an organization I work with, my union. And I was going to put it in the chat, but I have to send it by email when I'm not multitasking. But 2 dates on that calendar, that was a question. So thank you for your presentation. I guess I should have said that first. Intersex Awareness Day is on October 26th, and Celebrate Bisexuality Day is September 23rd. And so those are 2 things to consider. We don't have the intersex in our acronym, but there was a motion to review our acronym and how during the rest of this term, at our first meeting, I believe. I want to mention the historical nature of our flags. Gilbert Baker, the original, I was going to say trans flag, that's Monica Helms, created the trans flag that we're using. And that's there, but there is an Ottawa trans flag created by a non-trans person. They call them cisgendered nowadays in this generation. But Gilbert Baker has, I think, honoring and acknowledging the historic nature of our symbols is incredibly important, but also being able to be nimble, and maybe nimble's not the word, but flexible in change. And so I've fallen on the progress flag, which other people as my I am supportive of the progress flag being moved into more public domains like the City of Toronto, while honoring the history for some of us old cranky people like me sometimes, because that history is a really important part of our lives. Those are my notes actually, but I just want to thank you. Oh, and one last comment, because we must share time here. I noticed the city and the term of transgendered is actually almost like chalk, fingernails on a chalkboard for me, because when I was at, I'm here part of the Trans Coalition. It was the Trans Alliance, you'll see, as one of the partners. I used the term, I and many in Southern Ontario use the term Trans Day of Remembrance, Trans Day of Visibility, but there is a real tension, and this is a conversation outside of the framework of this, what's the word, of this meeting structure, is that the tensions between transgender, transsexual, I've written a major essay on that, so there's a lot of history there. So I just wanted to, my preference is to use the word trans, actually, at least in this context. I'll just, those are my initial comments. Thank you for this opportunity. And I really look forward to continuing to work with you on as this emerges, because it's not static, it's not still. We're fluid and we're forever learning and unlearning. Thank you. Next.
Thank you, Suzanne. Next to speak is Ranjit, followed by Laurie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Ranjit Kulatilaka. My gender pronouns are he or they, and I second everything all the other speakers said. And in addition, I would also like to suggest that we need to move beyond any sense of any performative sense. Now, 2022 City of Toronto community recognition. So what follows recognition should be a lot of groundwork. Then only recognition becomes meaningful. And I validate the work that the City of Toronto has been doing over the years, many years. And this is not to invalidate any of the work that the City of Toronto and community activists have been doing. This is in addition, moving forward. And the intersectionality lens is so important because of these reasons. I'll give you a few comments. For example, during COVID, queer and trans seniors have been so affected. 2S LGBTQ plus, Two-Spirit people, LGBTQ plus refugees and newcomers have been extremely highly affected, impacted by COVID because of so many issues that they have been facing. Access to housing, access to the COVID jab has not been in the first priority for them, or has not been prioritized, even though they have been working on the front line at seniors care homes and at places where they are more prone to getting the COVID. And I have been working with so many LGBTQ plus newcomers who have got the COVID through their work, because of their work. And youth, towards LGBTQ plus youth, have been overrepresented in home, people who have been forced to become homeless. So while recognizing, my question is for us to think is that how come these issues are also rampant, and I have no idea, I don't know whether they are being resolved or whether they are being aggravated because of local global conditions. So recognition needs to essentially entail the groundwork and the commitment to make lives better. And then only recognition any form of recognition becomes meaningful and sustainable. Otherwise, we get into the performative realm. We wave the rainbow flag, but LGBTQ plus newcomers are being funding cuts are continuing. It's same for everybody else. For trans people, for youth, for seniors especially, it's similar. So my suggestion is to seriously take commitments and action to mitigate these inequities so that any recognition that we take or that we make becomes meaningful and sustainable. Thanks.
Ranjit, thank you very much for your comments. That was great. Thank you. Lori, you are next.
Thank you, Lauria Ross, she, her pronouns. I will just appreciate and echo the comments of my fellow committee members. I was going to mention Celebrate Bisexuality Day on September 23rd, which Susan has already done. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lori. And I see Councillor Ainsley's hand go up. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then we're just going to proceed. Monica, next, please.
Hi, Rita, and thank you for your presentation. Yeah, a lot of it's
Monica, we just lost your audio and video.
Yeah, because I'd like to see more representation on stuff.
Monica, I'm sorry, we're
Can you
losing.
hear me?
I can hear you now, but we couldn't see you in the committee room, but you're now back on my screen, so please go ahead. And now you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Rita, thanks for your presentation.
Monica, Monica, it's Kristen again. I apologize for the interruption. I do apologize, but I believe that if you, it may be your audio and the video bandwidth. If you try to turn off your video and leave your audio on, maybe we can try to hear you, even if we cannot see you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Everyone's so patient.
Is that better?
Yes, please go ahead. Lots of nods.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. Yeah, so thanks, Aretha, once again for your presentation. And yeah, so a lot of it's kind of echoing like our past community members' responses around bringing more awareness on certain days like December 6th or Sisters in Spirits, which I haven't heard, is another a day within our calendar in the Indigenous community that acknowledges women, trans folks, and around missing murders. And also, I'm just more curious around how to become a partnership and what is the process of doing that. So I don't know if you're going to be sending out links or so forth, but that's about it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And next is Terrence, then followed by Councillor Ainsley. And I see, Jad, your hand went up. Thank you. Okay, Terrence, please go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Aretha. That was awesome. Good to hear everything that is happening. So again, similarly mimicking, so I won't be mimicking, but I will lend my voice to the progress flag. I agree with raising that, and we do the same. As for raising of the flags, as you were talking about that, I was thinking there are a lot of city facilities across the area, the city. And I was wondering why not have those flags raised during all those facilities. So thinking about my community in Rexdale, we have the Rexdale Community Hub, and it would be amazing to have that raised. Very few, very rare times do you see flags raised in my community because it's not an inclusive community. So when I was thinking about that, I'm like, that would be amazing. And then I continued along that process and thought, I'd be like, what if the city created multiple events on the same day in different locations around the GTA, having these flag raising ceremonies, and then you could include, say, the councillors in those particular areas at these flag raising ceremonies. So anyways, it was just a brainstorming thought, but I would love to see it in Rexdale specifically. Like I know we have the Rexdale Community Hub. And then another thought that came to mind, and this didn't come up, and I don't know if this would be under this purview, but an idea is looking at city facilities. I know there are still some that have gender binary kind of washrooms. So putting it on your radar if it is part of your radar, but if it's possible to make all gendered washrooms in city facilities. And that's it.
Terrence, thank you. And Councillor Ainsley, then Jad.
Thanks, Kristen. Actually, Terrence took most of my comments. Aretha, I want to thank you for your presentation. I just want to say, as a city councillor from Eastern Scarborough, one of my frustrations is that the flag raisings are at City Hall. And if I want to have flag raisings at the Scarborough Civic Centre, sorry, not so much me, but East Toronto Pride, if they want to have a flag raising in the Scarborough Civic Centre, they need a city councillor to sponsor them or sign off on the paperwork, which I don't mind doing. I'm very happy to do it. I just think that as a city trying to be more inclusive, we should, we need to do away with that. And the flag raisings just automatically happen, that we find some time on the appropriate days. Let's have the one at City Hall. Maybe the mayor can come out to Scarborough or Etobicoke or North York to show we are a more inclusive city. There was a report recently that Two-Spirit LGBTQS youth in Scarborough are having trouble finding a meeting place, and they don't feel they're getting the services they deserve. And I think the city needs to lead by example, and the flags automatically going up, I think, are an important part of that role model. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ainsley. And then Jad.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jad Chapel, founder of Marginalized Majority Pronouns. I just wanted to ask a quick question. In representing and highlighting organizations and partnerships, is there a systematic review of the current partners and another parallel review to see if there are any other new organizations, grassroots organizations that are doing the work that might be worth highlighting? And how do we present as advisory members, how do we present these organizations to the board and to the space? I do not know if there's a specific way or a specific modality, but it's important that we don't keep highlighting the same organizations over and over again, and that we give a chance to highlight other grassroots organizations that are doing the work. Thank you.
Jad, thank you very much. Anyone else? Questions or comments at this point? Okay, Ranjit, you want a second round? You want to speak again? Okay, so anyone else who want to speak again? Because we do have 6 more items on the agenda. But Ranjit, go ahead.
Thank you. Very quickly. So my suggestion is also, when we have so many international days or days of recognition, for example, World Refugee Day is on the 20th of June, one example. And these celebrations tend to be more on a cis heteronormative lens. So take the queer trans two-spirit lens into all the programming and recognition events. So when we talk about, if there is any celebration, any recognition of the World Refugee Day, for example, June 20th, mention and highlight that thousands of LGBTQ plus refugee and newcomer people who are struggling to make ends meet and to live their lives in Toronto and in Canada, for example. Similarly, in every other event and recognition. So this is how intersectionality and trans queer lens should permeate in all spheres. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ranjit. Anyone before we start to move on? Okay, anyone else? No? Okay, so I do have, Aretha, thank you very much for your presentation. I do have not necessarily questions, but just a quick motion. And the motion is to request that you incorporate this committee's feedback into your 2022 work plan for the city's recognition approach for two-spirited lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer recognition initiatives. Aretha, thank you for your presentation, for all that you do.
Thank you.
I know that we keep you very busy at City Council, and you try to make us all look very good. I know Councillor Ainsley will probably agree with me. Otherwise, we are just sort of bumbling along without the protocol office. And thank you very much for coming to this committee and soliciting the feedback. I think what you're hearing from the committee overall, although I didn't hear any objections, is that we're all leaning towards the progressive progress flag. And if you need a motion to solidify that, we could certainly put that on the table. Or you can take our comments today as direction to go that way. And I do recognize that this conversation with our community continues to evolve, and that may change as the community. Thank you very much for putting the motion on the screen. That may also change as dialogue shifts in our community. One thing that's so wonderful about being a member of this community is that we are hyper diverse and also very mindful of our diversity and how we try to bring everybody in under that umbrella. I do flag that. Like literally flag. I do flag that several of the wonderful comments about getting more of the symbols of equality for LGBT queer liberation out into different parts of the city will need to have partnerships. Some of it, of course, the city can do, because if we own and manage those assets, then why not raise the flag in other civic centers? And I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Ainsley is that we should be flying the progressive rainbow flag in all our civic centers during the Pride Month whenever possible. The other thing is that I know that there was a comment, and it was a really great comment about making sure that we saw either it's the symbols or just recognition throughout the city beyond the Church and Wellesley catchment area. I want to sort of at least acknowledge that the Church and Wellesley BIA does significant work. Our office supports some of that work as a local councillor, but from the sidewalk painting to the road flags, rainbow or trans, that was all funded through our office and through City Council. The Barbara Hall lights, which can go dynamic and rainbow, of course, is another invention, I would say, from our local community. And the same thing with the Church Street illuminated fence. All of these investments are really to try to create that marker of significance to say we are here, we're queer, we're colorful, and we're not going away. I think we would need to see the same level of enthusiasm and participation from the other local BIAs in the communities, including the one that Leslie was speaking eloquently and passionately about. So therefore, we have to encourage the BIAs to take up the same type of enthusiasm and branding and exercise for inclusion during Pride Month and beyond. So if that could also be part of your work, is to communicate with your colleagues in economic development and culture so that they can get the message out. Locally, I know that the Downtown Young BIA already wraps themselves in rainbow colors, window displays, because they're not part of the Church Wellesley catchment area, but they certainly know that when you're the shoulder to Church and Wellesley, you've got to lean into it. So I just offer some of those additional thoughts because I know it's not going to be all necessarily on the city. But I think Laurie's comments really moved me at the very beginning. She spoke at the top about making sure that when we do recognition and protocol ceremonies with other communities on other days is to be as intersectional as possible. And when Laurie made her comments, I was thinking about the work that we do even within the Chinese Canadian community and how I have to almost compartmentalize myself as I move through those different spaces because we're not always seeing our whole authentic self. So I think that is a responsibility of the protocol office, to be quite honest, is to make sure that when you are inviting speakers at all these events throughout the year, is to think about this community and how they are or are not represented. and please invite them and us in. Thank you very much for remarks. So we have one motion on the floor, and if there's no questions of the mover, I would just ask for indicating your support by raising your hand. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. Okay, so great work, team. We are moving on to item number 3, preliminary service plan for transgender non-binary youth. And Anania, are you here? We welcome you. Nice to see you.
I am here. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm just so pleased that you invited us here. Can you hear me? I'm hearing the distraction.
We can hear you. For some reason, it is, I will admit that it is, you sound a bit underwater in the committee room. Jennifer just shook their head, so I think you may be sounding like that for everybody else on the screen.
Okay, I'm gonna put in my headset and see if it makes a difference.
Okay, thank you. Already, it's improved.
Is this any better for you?
Can you just count to 5?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I can hear you, but if you can just raise your voice or speak into the microphone more directly, I think we can proceed.
I will do that. Okay, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. So greetings to us LGBTQ plus advisory committee. Thanks so much for inviting us. This is truly an honor for us to share the preliminary service plan for transgender and non-binary youth being done through Social Development, Finance and Administration Division. The contributions of two-spirited, transgender and non-binary people in Toronto is vibrant and well through the arts, culture, academia, government policies, and social justice and community development change. So I am deeply pleased that this council exists and that the city gets to experience and act on your input. My colleague and indomitable manager of youth development in our division, Stephanie Hansen, will be doing the bulk of the presentation. Stephanie has led this work with great respect and pride and inclusive care. I'll be here to answer your questions if you have any, and I really look forward to the expertise and wisdom that you will be given to us to enhance this work. Stephanie, I turn it over to you.
Anania, thank you very much for your introduction and the greeting. I want to ask if the staff, whoever's monitoring the screen, can you give us the full presentation? I don't think it was your intention to show us your speaking notes.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
My apologies.
No problems. Don't give away your secrets here.
Here we are. Let me try this again. Is this better?
It's not on the screen yet, Stephanie. It might be loading.
Okay. Let me just take a second here. My apologies for this.
No problems. This is real world WebEx meetings.
If you want me to do it, Steph, I can go to the bring up
1 second.
If it does take too much time to sort out, we can always go back to the previous screen.
Okay, it should be coming now.
Perfect.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. Annie and I were trying to work this up this morning, so thank you all very much for having us here today. Again, my name is Stephanie Hansen. I'm the manager for youth development, and I go by the pronouns she and her, and depending on the day, them. I really wanted to just echo what Annie was saying about the vibrancy of the community and how much contributions we do receive from our two-spirit, non-binary, and trans young people. We do have some work to do, though, because we understand that 26% of trans people have experienced police harassment due to race and ethnicity. We also understand that 22% of trans people of color have turned down jobs due to their race and ethnicity. We also understand that 1 in 3 young people who identify as trans also have attempted suicide. So we have much work to do as it comes to developing a preliminary service plan. We're calling it preliminary because we know that there will have to be a number of iterations to compound the work and to ensure that we're looking out and really servicing these young people in a meaningful way. So the purpose of the plan, really, I just want to spend a little bit of time here because I know we're actually running a bit late, is really to support young people who identify as two-spirit, non-binary, and trans. And this actually came out of work that we were doing in the Toronto Youth Equity Strategy. And the Toronto Youth Equity Strategy was a 110-point strategy that really focused on young people who are most vulnerable to serious violence and crime, both on a systemic level and within community. We do want to build a comprehensive service plan with the power to improve the lives of young people, because we understand that there are different barriers and different experiences that our two-spirit, non-binary, and trans young people face. And I'm sure we all have heard the stories and the issues that are being confronted in the community. And so in essence, when trans feminine, non-binary, and trans masculine people are safe, cisgendered women and girls also experience increased safety from gender-based violence. We have drafted a part of this report and wanted to really focus and ground our work in this understanding that we have to really work with the most vulnerable to improve safety in the community. There's been 3 phases to the work, and we just want to go through really quickly sort of what we've done, because I really want to get into the discussion and conversation because I know it will be rich. We did start out in 2017 with an advisory group of young people, mostly comprised of folks who wanted to have input on the plan. We did come up with 5 thematic areas and about 70 recommendations across some of these thematic areas, as you can see here. However, when we did that consultation, we realized that we need to do a deeper dive with our two-spirit and ABC non-binary communities. In our second phase, we worked with 2 community service organizations who are grassroots organizations and also helped us to convene with the population a little bit more in depth. We worked with the Native Youth Sexual Health Network, aka NISHN. We developed a youth council advisory to advise on the consultation process. They did carry out a series of consultations which yielded about 18 recommendations that were specific to the two-spirit population, and some which cross over into our non-binary population as well. I also wanted to just raise here that when NISHN carried out the consultations, they wanted to see a secondary or a different service plan coming forward that was much more narrow in scope as it pertains to our two-spirit young people. We also engaged through the Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit, which is led by Anthony Morgan, Black Cap, and Soy. And we conducted a 3-part series that aimed to identify specific needs and aspirations of Toronto Black, queer, trans youth and their parents and caregivers. And Black Cap is now utilizing that information to inform some of the services and programs that they are currently providing. We wanted to do a deeper dive and again focus in on the ABC non-binary trans young people, where we need to hear more from them because we know that there are barriers that they face, especially when it comes to employment, revenue generation, and access generally to space and other types of services. We wanted to dig deeper with this population, and I think we still have more work to do with our two-spirit young people, but I'll get to that in a second. We engaged Black Cap further because we wanted to again build an advisory of young people who can help with some of the consultation work and dig deeper into recommendations that are specific to the population. Some of the things we weren't seeing were really around safety around work, safety issues as it pertains to police brutality, some of the things that we know to be issues within the community. We also didn't want to just engage with Black Cap for the purposes of consultation, but also wanted to engage with them to help us understand and prepare the environment as it pertains to employment for ABC non-binary trans folks, and pilot some initiatives to see what's possible and work with some employers. Because one of the things we've learned from some of our proxy kind of communities and our grassroots orgs is that it's one thing to want to build the plan, but there's still stuff that can be done in the meantime as we get set up. And the city, I think, has more levers, I think, as it pertains to some of the youth employment challenges that young people face. We're also working with Black Cap to do a bit of a literature review to see what other cities are doing with respect to some of the thematic areas and other recommendations that are coming throughout the consultative work. Some of the methodologies I just wanted to speak to at a high level. So we've done a lot of community engagement and consultation. We've made consultation guides for young people who are of the community to conversate with their peers and friends. Not everybody's coming to a formal consultation. The advisory bodies have been really helpful because it really helps us to steer into some of the areas that we may not be aware of and ask questions in a way that I think we couldn't ask as city staff particularly. And again, like I was saying before with Black Cap, we wanted to pilot test some things like some employment modules, engagement of private employers to also do the work while preparing the service plan. Lit reviews, important to see what other communities are doing and jurisdictions are doing. And we've also made sure to go back and ground truth with people who have been involved what we've heard. Some of our next steps is really, I think, to continue to build relationship with Two-Spirit's community more effectively. While Mission, Native Youth Sexual Health Network, conducted consultations, we still want to make sure we're checking in with the IAO, and we're also doing some work that they've pointed out to us to say there are other folks, other groups, other elders that you need to consult. For example, I think it's the Two-Spirit of the First Nations, where a conversation, I think, needs to be had. We're going to continue to validate some of the recommendations that we have through those further connections. This report has been with us for some time now, and Ania and our division really wants to move this forward and come back to committee with something in Q2 of 2022. And I think that it's a prudent time to do that because I think we have enough information to move forward with, but maybe set up some other check-in points and set up some work planning in the report back to committee council about how to keep a plan like this fresh and how to keep it solidified and resourced appropriately. We do want to create some time and space for questions, and so I will take down the PowerPoint. I hope I've been clear, and really would love to get into some of the discussion about, some of our next steps. And one thing I wanted to also say is that it's been a very interesting journey as the City of Toronto wanting to do this work, wanting to do deep consultation with the youth population. We have faced some difficulties in terms of working with the population and the trust building that needs to be done, which is not an overnight thing. You have to be there and you have to set up inroads show care and concern. Because, for example, groups like Mission and Black Cat, they don't just want to be in it for the consultation, they want to know what the future is. So it's been very difficult, I think, to break into this and into this work and build trust with the community while building the service plan. So thank you so much.
Stephanie, thank you very much for your presentation, and to Ann and Nia as well for your opening remarks and setting the stage for what I believe is going to be a really important dialogue. I have everybody's wonderful, beautiful faces on my screen. If you can raise your hand and indicate who has questions or who would like to speak, this is the time. Otherwise, I'll call on you one at a time because I know this is a pretty important report. Terrence first, thank you. Anyone else? We'll start there. And Susan. Okay, so we'll start with Terrence and then Susan. Go ahead, please, Terrence.
Awesome. Thanks, folks, for the presentation. And I'm so glad to hear that this is going on. The community I work in, many CB folks, POCs, got a lot of newcomers, it's a big population. So happy to see. When you were looking, or you were listing some of the key focus areas, what I didn't see was healthcare. Healthcare is a big barrier, and not just for the trans community. I've encountered some challenges with our local hospital in our area, mental health department, suicide watch, all that, and not just that, unfortunately, a lot of folks are accessing that service. This service is not inclusive. The professionals there have flat out told them that they are not from the community or queer, or that it's a phase. So there needs to be a lot of work in the healthcare system for the community. Another thing is education. Education is a massive barrier. A lot of the youth in our area get shifted over to the Triangle program because the schools in our area see it easier to just push them out as opposed to changing their own school environments to be more inclusive. So that's another big area. So I just wanted to add those two as additional focuses if possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terrence. And our next speaker will be Leslie. It's Susan, and then followed by Leslie. Susan, first, please.
Yeah, I could go after Leslie, but just wanted to be brief, but I'm never brief. I'm Susan Gapka. I use she and her pronouns. But thank you for this plan. A couple things come to mind. I notice you used, just to reaffirm the point I made in the earlier agenda item, you're using the word trans throughout this document. And just to bring to your attention, I did check the agenda and it was just posted. There were some communications on this, and one of the organizations, which is a partner, the 519, is using the term trans as well. So just seeing, yes, we agree. Thank you for that. I think it's really, it's really important strategy. You talked a lot about Black Cat. So I think racialized, two-spirit, trans and non-binary people should be, I'm going to say, I feel odd saying it, should be prioritized. What I'm learning is white European descendant people like myself, there's a bit of a tier system coming in access to services between European descendants like me and people who are racialized. And so I think it's really important that this come forward. I'm looking at age as a spectrum, and I'm looking at Leslie over there. I don't know if it's appropriate decorum to note other people in the panel. It's so good to see your smiling faces. But we not only need a youth strategy for trans and non-binary and two-spirit people, we need a senior strategy for trans, non-binary, and trans people, and even little folks like me who just want to get an age in place and have access to services. I'm very privileged for a number of reasons, including my ancestry and citizenship and education and all of that. But not everyone's doing so well. So we need to catch this at both ends of the age spectrum as I understand age. And I'm looking at Ranjit there and I don't always start with intersectionality. In my other groups, I'm the leader, but I'm multitasking today. So just really looking at the intersections of all of us as we march forward on this plan. So thank you for your presentation. And I think those are my comments for today. And I don't know if we need to just whatever we can do to push this forward to the next level. Because I remember reading this report several years ago and the pandemic has interfered. Let's come out of this pandemic with some strength on these type of strategies. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Susan, for your comments. Leslie, anyone else? Jennifer, was that your hand up? Or are you just playing with your hair? Okay. All right. Leslie, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation, Stephanie. That was really enlightening. I want to also agree with what Terence and Susan have said. It occurred to me also that an intergenerational approach would be really helpful. And I have been cultivating queer Black seniors, a group of queer Black seniors. But it's like pulling teeth to have older Black queer people acknowledge the fact that they are indeed seniors. So I do have that resource to offer you, and I agree with what Susan said. Let's also create something for queer seniors, because there isn't anything. We keep being forgotten, we're invisible, we're isolated. There's also a high suicide rate amongst queer seniors that people don't talk about. And the impact of COVID on us has been devastating. I was in a long-term care home for 2 months because I broke my ankle, and that's where I ended up before going into rehab. And it was a lovely long-term care home, but I was a prisoner. And the racism is rampant. So queer youth of color and queer seniors of color, we're experiencing similar similar situations. And what Terence pointed out about healthcare, our healthcare is sorely lacking. I am with Buddies in Bad Times Theatre with the Youth Elders Project, and that's how come I'm working with queer elders of color. And also I have been doing work with SOY for many years, working with Burlia. So, and when I go in to do my presentations, it's the first time that the youth are having any interaction with somebody who's older than 40. So, and yes, Susan, I am a very proud queer dyke. 68 and doing great. So thanks again, Stephanie. And you can get my information from Janice. I'm more than happy to chat with you.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you very much for that generous spirit. It's always great to see you laugh. It's infectious. Any other members? Jad, thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, Jad, go ahead, please.
Thank you. It's very important that when we're discussing certain intersectional issues that we don't bind them all together, and that we address each specific cultural issue separately. And I can only speak about my culture, which is Arab, and I can speak also about Arab, Persian, Muslim, including North African. And asylum seekers and refugees that are queer, that are coming from my culture, are facing real severe barriers, linguistic barriers, communication barriers, cultural barriers, employment barriers, specifically on the recruitment and selection, level. This is a very emotional subject for me because a while ago we did lose a member of my community, which is Sarah Higazi in Toronto, and many other folks in the past period, like myself, have been tweeting and reaching out and kind of screaming, saying, I'm a postdoctorate researcher personally. I've been under 2 eviction notices. Sometimes it's difficult to access food, and I have been unemployed for 2 years. even though I founded an entire organization and serviced 4,500 marginalized queer folks like myself. And still, I cannot explain to you the on-the-ground barriers that folks from my culture are facing. We come through Rainbow Railroad and many other formats, and we are very grateful for that. We don't want to be told, if this is not enough for you, go back home. But we can't come here and then just come here to the space without any real access to employment and to mental health care and to all these things that are needed for our basic survival. Thank you.
Jad, thank you. Thank you for those very powerful words. Anyone else to speak, to ask questions at this point? Ranjit, go ahead, please.
I just want to underscore the importance of intersectionality in every sphere, every realm, simply because I will talk about myself. I'm not a single story, and I can never be a single story. I don't think any human being can be a single story. And there is an amazing TED talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. The title of the story is The Danger of a Single Story. You Google it, it's everywhere. So, and this is why it is so important when we talk about 2S LGBTQ plus youth, to bring that intersectionality lens. And I want to highlight one factor as well. Now, being new to Canada, being new to this land is also a key social determinant of health, key political determinant of health, I would say. So this is why it is important to highlight the intersectionality, and we cannot switch off and switch on intersectionality as long as we live. Thank you.
Ranjit, thank you very much for that comment. Anyone else? Terrence, great. Go ahead, Terrence.
Apologize, round two, but folks are talking and thoughts came up. So again, sharing from experience in Rexdale and the work I do, the other major thing that I forgot to mention that would probably play a factor in this is housing and shelters. Throughout my work, I've countless every year referrals to the shelter system. Most of my youth get kicked out of their homes or leave for safety reasons. And there are not enough shelters. The shelter that we have in Rexdale gets full very fast. And so I'm having to connect with other shelter systems across the city, which is challenging in itself. But then you have a youth who's already been displaced from their home. And now you're also displacing them from their community and their peer supports and their school, which is really challenging. There needs to be more shelter and supports within localized communities, so we're not uprooting them as they're already going through some massive displacement in their home life.
Thank you very much, Terrence. Thank you for those remarks. Anyone else? Okay. I will just have a couple of quick questions. Stephanie, your presentation, thank you very much for coming today. I want to just understand, you need some guidance from this committee, and I think you've heard quite a bit of comments, and some of them are very powerful and obviously grounded in lived experience. I think because this service plan that you're developing is coming out of a larger strategy for the city, the youth equity strategy, you pulled off a piece and said, we've identified that that trans and non-binary youth are experiencing a disproportionate level of violence. You are seeing that the youth equity strategy is trying to address youth violence systematically across the city, but now you want to drill down and work with this specific population. So I guess the question I have for you is, how are you working with the trans and non-binary community, and what does that consultation and deep engagement look like? Because you've heard from the advisory committee today that you've got to be able to sort of bring in those lived experiences, bring in the intersectional approach. So is that something you already have in place? Do you have an advisory group that's moving you forward, giving you strategic advice?
We do have sort of more specific advisory groups as per the populations that we are working with. but an overall advisory group we don't have at this time. And I think that's maybe one of the questions to bring up today is like, should we get sort of a global oversight, mindful of the comments that have been made today about the intersectionality pieces? I would really see that as a value add as we steer into the reporting season.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess moving forward, your path to report back, is this, I think you, in your presentation, I noted that you said you're coming back in 2022, third quarter. So is that report going to be a high-level strategy again, or is it going to be an implementation operational plan with the budget requests?
I'm going to leave the budget request piece to Anania, but my hope would be that it would be a comprehensive implementation report and set up some operational opportunities so we can work in depth with the population and work with community service organizations in some of the offerings as well. Some of them are policy-based as well and don't necessarily require budget. I'll turn it over to Anania for a response as well.
Okay.
Through the chair, that's an excellent response, Stephanie. Much of the work won't be a budget request, but of course we will have a small budget request. But answer your question, yes, we cannot build a plan and especially an implementation plan without also ensuring we have the resources to do it.
Okay, and Anania, thank you. That was extremely helpful. Okay, so that brings me to the end of my own questions. I'm going to just, I do have a motion, so I'm going to restart my clock because I have to do this very quickly. My motion is to direct staff who are on the screen today to convene a table of stakeholders that are two-spirited, trans and non-binary individuals with lived experience to guide their work. So as they develop this service plan for two-spirited, trans, and non-binary youth as part of the youth equity strategy, I want to make sure that there are people that with lived experience, with the expertise that you're looking for, that will help inform you. And I do also want to welcome you back to this committee if you think you can get back to us by May to see what you've come up with. I think it would be helpful for us to understand, after spending some time with the community in deep conversation, what direction are you heading in. You can take the screen down, thank you. And I just want to, offer some additional thoughts. And I think the committee spoke incredibly well. There's just a lot of, I think, feedback when we talk about intersectionality, making sure that the city carries out its work with that intersectional approach. I fear that we work with a number of partners on the ground who do not have the intersectional approach. So we have, millions of dollars literally going out the door, not just from the city, but the provincial and federal government, who are supporting youth work and youth empowerment, youth employment, youth housing, youth shelter, youth health, and youth violence, ending youth violence. And what I think I'm seeing is that those organizations and agencies on the ground are not necessarily thinking about their population that they serve with the same type of intersectional approach. So it would be very difficult if the strategy that you want to devise, the service plan, does not entirely weave itself back to the overall youth equity strategy, which then guides all those agencies and funded partners, service providers out there, that this is the expectation of the city. The fact that we have to create our LGBT-specific shelters, I guess on one hand is a good thing because we recognize the special needs of our community, but at the same time, it lets everybody else off the hook, meaning that all the other shelters are not queer friendly, not trans friendly, not non-binary friendly, and two-spirited friendly. So I just want to recognize that there's probably a way for us to cut across the systematic and structural barriers, and the city has got to lead that conversation. So I'm glad that we're here having that discussion. There should be no reason why Jad's organization is struggling as much as his organization is when we have money going out the door, once again, supporting newcomer settlement programs. Why are we having to create something else off the side of our desk when those organizations are multi-million-dollar organizations with AGMs and boards and accountability structures that need to respond to us as funders? So therefore, the city must fund organizations that are deeply embedded in the work, and they cannot be released from that obligation. And so I just want to flag that because I think, to me, it's something that I keep seeing over and over again. The other thing around violence, you know, the population is underrepresented in studies. We need to see study and research in order for us to drive policy and structural change. Then you get to implementation and execution of plans. And while we continue to be invisible in those studies, then no one is going to speak about what we need. And so we need to make sure that the researchers and the information that's driving the policy change is going to incorporate people of the population that you're trying to reach. I'm going to just speak about gender-based violence because I think that's important, and intimate partner violence. I do recognize that when we see violence in our community, there's really no place for us to report it. When someone has experienced sexual violence or sexual assault, they're not going to necessarily run to the police. Hospitals may not understand the needs of a trans and non-binary individual, and it is incredibly difficult for them, for any of us, to try to report, if we choose to report. And and I think we need to recognize that we don't always have to report. It should be our choice. So there is a major structural deficiency when it comes to who is taking care of us when we get hurt, when we experience structural systemic violence. And some of it, of course, is state sanctioned, whether it's just, you know, anti-poverty strategies that fail, or the lack of housing, or employment discrimination. So I want to be able to take an approach and ask you in your work, Stephanie and Ania, to take that approach, is that we deal with the structural deficiencies of a system that continue to keep our communities, you know, at bay. And then I guess the harder conversation, and this is the one I have struggled with as a member of the community, is dealing with lateral violence. What happens when we ourselves are not equipped with the violence that is coming at us within our community? And this happens in every community, so I don't want to single out this community, but because we're talking about the 2S trans and non-binary community, is that we need to find a way, and maybe this is our work and not necessarily the city's work, but I just want to put it out there, is that we need to find a way to address the lateral violence that is inflicted upon the community within the community, oftentimes because of scarce resources, because of lack of this or that, and there's just so much. Our next report is going to be dealing around the drug poisoning, and I know that we're going to have probably a very connected conversation to what we're dealing with here. But Stephanie, thank you very much for your presentation. That brings me to the end of my own remarks, and the motion is before us. Are there any questions of the mover of the motion? Okay, seeing none, then all those in favor, we have one motion. Any opposed? That carries. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. We have, next item is QS 4.4, Actions to Respond to Drug Poisoning Crisis in Toronto. Welcome, Alicia Neufeld. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you so much, Chair. Just share my screen. Oh, I don't actually seem to have, oh, there we are. Okay.
Okay, it's switching over, Alicia. Please be patient. We're getting to you.
Great. All right. Are you able to see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So thanks, everybody. I'm very happy to be here to talk to the advisory committee today. My name is Alicia Neufeld. I'm the Associate Director of the Toronto Drug Strategy Secretariat, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm going to be providing a brief overview today of actions that Toronto Public Health is taking to respond to the drug poisoning crisis in Toronto. Some of you may have seen in the media this week that a similar presentation went before our Board of Health on Monday that had fairly significant recommendations around decriminalization and around health and social supports for those people who use drugs. So I'll be walking through a briefer version of that presentation today, and then talking about some of the specific elements that may be more unique to the two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer communities. So just for that context, on Monday, as I said, we went in front of the Board of Health, and the Board of Health directed the Medical Officer of Health to submit a request to Health Canada to decriminalize personal possession of drugs in the city of Toronto. And that request will go in before the end of this year. The Board of Health also requested, as one of its recommendations, that the province and the federal government look at expanding additional funding for some health and harm reduction and treatment services, including those services that can better address the needs of 2S LGBTQ populations. So for background, why are we here? The drug poisoning crisis has continued to intensify. We're in the middle of one of the worst drug poisoning crises we've seen, and it's only been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and a lot of the restrictions that were put in place due to the pandemic. The drug supply has become increasingly toxic and unpredictable. Fatal and non-fatal overdoses continue to increase. In fact, on December 1st, we received the highest number of calls to paramedics for suspected overdoses since we began collecting that data in 2017. So there were 60 calls across the city in one day, which is the highest we've seen. So the data that we have here really just shows you how much this issue has escalated since 2015. And over the last year since the pandemic began, really the market increase. The bars you see there are confirmed opioid toxicity deaths. That purple line you'll see are suspected drug-related deaths. So these might be deaths that involved opioids or other polysubstance use. It is you see a marked and very tragic increase. So when we look at what we wanted to do, and after the Board of Health directed us to do some work on alternatives to drug criminalization in June, I think it's important just to go through quickly how drug policy is handled in our intergovernmental landscape. So illicit substances are regulated by the federal government under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. That act has the ability to grant exemptions, however. So exemptions have been granted under that act for supervised consumption services in the city and in other cities across the country. So when you go into a supervised consumption service, that possession of drugs is decriminalized while you're in the confines of that space. And so we're really using that model that said, within a supervised consumption service, possession is decriminalized, and trying to apply it to the whole city. It's clear that the current approach isn't working. We have, a legal framework in place that hasn't reduced the supply of drugs and has only led to that supply becoming more toxic. That has led to Indigenous and Black populations becoming more and disproportionately targeted for personal possession offenses. That's led to stigma and discrimination against people who use drugs, and quite frankly, costs a lot of money to manage. So in 2017, the cost was $3.7 billion in Ontario alone on policing, courts, and correctional services related to enforcing those drug laws. So over the summer and fall, we did fairly substantial consultations. We had a working group of 27 organizations that met 5 times. We had a public survey that received almost 6,000 responses from the public. We had a number of roundtables with service providers from across the city, and one-to-one interviews with people to really truly understand what's happening on the ground for people who use drugs and how a new system could be placed to really better meet their needs. And through all those consultations, we came to the conclusion that for the human rights and social determinants of health approach needs to be taken to drug use. As the medical officer of health said on Monday, drug use is a health issue and not a criminal one. And so that's really necessary to remove that stigma and discrimination that's really put in place due to the criminalization of drugs currently in order to better connect people with the supports they may need. A key cornerstone, which I'll talk about a little bit later in my presentation, will be access to culturally safe and trauma-informed services from health workers and peers. And I've noted in some of the previous conversations this morning some concerns around whether medical services are safe for the 2S LGBTQ plus population, and I think there is some intersection there with people who use drugs as well. And also just saying that new investments are going to be needed from all levels of government to really make this real on the ground. So we put together this what we're called an evolving model that will go forward to Health Canada in our submission for an exemption. In general, it would operate across the city. It would apply to all drugs. It would ensure that there would be timely access to voluntary services in order to really reduce that interaction between police and courts. And there would be no fines or other penalties put in place to replace those criminal charges. And here you'll see these colorful boxes. These really are supports that in many cases already exist across the city, but in some cases the funding for them is time limited. In many cases, there's not sufficient capacity to meet the needs of our community. And so really looking forward, taking a two-pronged approach where we move forward with a policy change to decriminalize drugs for personal use. And then we also ensure that we have a network of safe and accessible health services that are there and able to work with people when they need them. And so these can be, from the very beginning, social determinants of health, some of the conversations that I know have already been had today around access to housing, equitable access to healthcare, food and nutrition, income support, harm reduction for people who are using drugs to really prevent overdoses, make sure that the drugs that they're using, are not toxic, additional access to substance use treatment for those who wish to access that, ensuring that it's available when they need it. Right now, we have limited access in the city to people when they want it. Certainly not 24/7 availability. Mental health services, because we know that drug use, oftentimes those with substance use disorders, that's not the only challenge that they're facing, and so making sure that we have those wraparound supports. And then safer supply, because I think this came up very clearly in the deputants that we received at the Board of Health meeting and in our consultations that decriminalization is one step in the pathway, but it's not going to address the whole myriad of issues, and it's certainly not going to make the unregulated drug supply less toxic. So this first step, the submission to Health Canada, sort of launches us on a path towards criminalization, but it's not the final step. There's going to need to be more work that's done. So, the first big piece of that is determining when this new decriminalization pathway would apply. Vancouver and BC have gone before us in this work. Both of them have put in thresholds for the amount of drugs that somebody could carry and count as personal possession. We haven't determined that here in the City of Toronto, so we're going to be working with people who use drugs, community providers, and other stakeholders to figure out a Toronto model for that work. We also heard loud and clear that it's really important that we have an Indigenous-led and developed pathway. So we're going to be working with a group of Indigenous organizations for them to design what that pathway would look like in the city. And then we need to make sure that the network of health and social services that we work with, that we enhance and expand, is going to work for people who use drugs, and ensure that the evaluation that we put in place is measuring the right outcomes and it's going to be meaningful and appropriate for what we're trying to do. The last thing that I'll say is that in addition to the work that we're doing on decriminalization, we're also going to be doing some work in the Toronto Drug Strategy Secretariat on the Toronto Drug Strategy. So for those of you who aren't aware, it was originally developed in 2005, which is quite a long time ago, looking at a comprehensive approach to drug policy for the city with 4 pillars of prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and enforcement. The world was very different in 2005 than it is now. Cannabis wasn't legal. The drug poisoning crisis was, it was not the situation that we're facing now. And so we want to really make sure that strategy is in place and still meeting the needs of our city. So that's one of the things that my team and I are going to be taking on in 2022. I'll note that the drug strategy that was released in 2005 didn't take a population-based approach. There are a few recommendations that are specific to youth and specific to families, but other than that, there's not a population-based approach. And so that's something that I want to talk to this advisory committee about today. In addition to our drug strategy, we also released the Toronto Overdose Action Plan in 2017 and a Toronto Indigenous Overdose Strategy in 2018. So as we're reviewing and revising the Toronto drug strategy, one of the pieces will be looking at those 3 strategies as whole and seeing how we can bring them together more comprehensively. So as I said, broad consultations will be undertaken as part of our continued work on the Toronto drug strategy refresh, as well as the work on our decriminalization model. However, I'm interested in hearing any thoughts that you have on any of these topics, but specifically a few questions that I had laid out here on this slide. So the services and supports that could be improved for 2S LGBTQ plus individuals. And I've been taking notes as some of you have been speaking through the other presentations on this, but I'm interested in hearing more about that. Also, are there issues related to stigma and discrimination that you think we should particularly take into consideration? Talking about intersectionality, people who use drugs in the city come from all backgrounds and all different walks of life. And there's certainly an intersection between people who use drugs and the 2S LGBTQ plus population. And I think that there are probably some unique concerns within those communities that I would appreciate your thoughts on. And then also, are there any specific drug use patterns that should be discussed, especially as I work on the Toronto drug strategy? Those weren't really considered in 2005, and so I would be very interested to hear that as well as any other feedback or thoughts that you have on the work.
Alicia, thank you very much for your presentation. I know that you've put a lot into what is a short presentation, but certainly at the Board of Health we had the benefit of a longer presentation. So I just want to recognize that. I'm just going to ask members if you have any questions or any comments for Alicia. This is a great time, and I will start building the speakers list. Please keep your hand up. I see Lori, followed by Jad and Susan. I think I saw your hand up. Anyone else before we go from there? Okay, so Laura, go first, and then Lori, I see you. Thank you. Laura first.
Laura, go by she, her, a member of Pequawpagayan First Nation. I don't know if this would have been something to disclaim during the conflict of interest, but I was actually the person who did the one-to-one interviews for the information piece. So I talked to a lot of the community already around what they want to see for the decriminalization process through those one-to-one interviews, and I know you folks got all the notes on that as well. So a little bit of what I heard there, and specifically from the 2S LGBT community, was that quantity holds is an issue. So I know that you folks are thinking about like how much to decriminalize. Something I heard from people who were visibly diverse was that they tended to buy in large quantities because it was safer for them. So if there was a quantities amount that you're only allowed to have, you only decriminalize if you have this small amount on you, they said that doesn't help them because someone who is visibly diverse may only go to a person once just because it puts them in an unsafe situation. So that was one piece. They also mentioned visibly inclusive spaces. So visibly inclusive spaces means that the people who are there to help, the social workers or whomever it is, also needs to be visibly diverse. And that this is an opportunity to create a queer safe space. So having literally a queer safe consumption space that people know about, and knowing that that can create community. And we often think of these spaces as treatment spaces, but really also they can be community spaces where you're meeting other people who are trying to get to reduce their use or use safely or whatever it is, and making sure that that's a space that, a community center, like it's a community space. And part of that too is lower barriers to who can work in these spaces. It doesn't always need to be nurses and doctors and social workers, but instead it can be people with lived experience. People with lived experience have more experience with how to use drugs safely than nurses and doctors. So we need to figure out a way that people with lived experience can be the ones who are hosting these spaces or helping host these spaces so that folks feel comfortable coming into them. And that means, someone who is trans, who is either currently a drug user or has a history of drug use, being there to help safe supply use. So making sure that those are the people who are included in those spaces and decision making. And just making sure that the people from the community are represented at all levels of consultation. So all groups is really, really important as well. So that's kind of what the pieces I heard from community members is just a lot of people who are scared. They're scared to go to safe consumption spaces because they may be verbally attacked, they may be rejected. A lot of folks who are at the kind of more vulnerable sector of drug use don't have the money to visibly pass. And so that is a piece that they need considered as well. And so people who are very, like cultural safety, I'm Indigenous, so I understand cultural safety from an Indigenous point of view, but there's a cultural safety and a queer point of view as well. Queer cultural safety is needed in these spaces. There's my small rant.
Laura, thank you very much for your comments. Thank you. Jad, you're next.
Thank you. Jad, he, they pronouns. So I have seen a pattern, and I hope that this pattern is able to help Alicia. The pattern is related to a power dynamic that's inherent, usually for new-coming immigrants and folks that have been here between 1 month to 2 to 3 years even. If they haven't been able to properly insert themselves into the Canadian economy, into the labor market, into having a proper GP. Sometimes I have some of my friends that haven't had access to the GP, to the GP in 8 months. When all these things happen, when you have a very vulnerable individual, and then you have someone else who is of privilege, who does have access to resources, and who is also able to supply drugs. For many folks from my culture, from newcomers, this is where we end up, honestly, on the streets, and we end up in very dark places. Because you are already from a vulnerable, you're already yearning for resources, you're already yearning for safety, and you have someone else with all these implications of safety that also has access to all these drugs, but also has a GP, has been part of the mental health care system for a long time, has all the things that they might be able to heal from if they develop an addiction, unlike this newcomer immigrant. So I would say first, it's good to take notice of power dynamics in the queer community, see really who is disenfranchised, who is vulnerable, and who they're reaching out to for power and support, and if that adds to any form of drug usage. Second thing, I would say culturally sensitive, so that's a pattern. As for services, culturally sensitive mental health care is very important. Many times we reach out to therapists and healers and folks and who don't really understand our cultural experience. For example, I see CAMH starting to speak about intergenerational trauma and starting to look at the sources of drug use. And also, finally, it's important to educate newcomers and educate refugees and folks who are arriving on predatory behaviors. It's important to tell them that, you know, you might find someone who is able to tell you, hey, come stay at mine for a month, and I'm able to supply you with this if you're home, if you can't find housing. So having these very culturally nuanced stories to collect and then disseminate to newcomers is also very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jad. Susan, next.
Hi, I'm Susan. I'm just starting a timer here because and you may have to rein me in, but I'll be on my best behavior. I use she and her pronouns. I guess I'll tell you, I have come out, I'm struggling here. I do have personal experience at the other side of this policy decision in mental health and long-term recovery. Thank goodness I'm celebrating almost 25 years in the turn of the new, well, in the summer, but you're not supposed to count ahead. But so it's very, very important that the city move in this direction. And so I have sent a motion to Janice, I think, that this committee endorse and support this recommendation. I want to thank you and everyone at the Board of Health for all your work. I made a couple notes on things I heard about see, when you mix the personal with policy, it can get a little a little flustered, but here we're going to go. I made some notes on about the threshold comments. I heard that the threshold is really subjective, as is the difference between illegal and legal drugs. The recreational concept that under the current legal structure of criminalizing people who don't use who use a particular type of drug which is not produced by multinational pharmaceutical companies, that they become criminalized. And so your report, this the war on drugs actually goes back to about 100 years. I really appreciated, well, even further, but Councillor Perk's comments on that. It did come at the end of Prohibition, and a number of people needed work. So Prohibition ended and drug criminalization just escalated since then. Of course, Richard Nixon in 1971 escalated the war on drugs. Clinton with Pax America escalated on South America. And what's the other point? And actually really has criminalize entire neighborhoods. So this is a good direction. I think in some ways it doesn't go far enough to undo the harm that this 100-year war has created on especially 2S LGBTQ2 plus communities, but racialized and indigenous and Two-Spirit members. So I like to see this report come back. That's in the motion that I sent to the clerk or staff, so that we can just monitor the implementation. I've got 3 minutes or maybe a minute and a half left. I'm watching the clock. It doesn't talk about safe supply. And so I'm hoping that's something we can get to. This is an incremental, long awaited policy to come forward. I think I'm just going to close with, like, I'm one of those people who've been working on this for about 30 years. When the works first opened up, then we started implementing street health programs, and I was part of a group at the Parkdale Community Health Center, which actually wrote the first proposal for community-based methadone, and that's taken off. We had hoped for Narcan, and that took like a couple decades to happen. So I just want to really salute the people that have been working on this, both in public policy and engaging people with lived experience who are experiencing these difficulties, challenges, and the harm of prohibition and criminalization on an everyday basis. And I just want to really salute all the work, and I'm just overwhelmingly with joy to see this come forward, and just want whatever we can do to support you and accelerate implementation of this. I'm here for you. Thanks, and I think I'm just at 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you for sharing those personal comments. Not always easy, but you always deliver them with such grace and eloquence. Susan, I just wanted to ask, I think you have a motion which was not presented. Oh, okay, so actually the clerk's just flagged for me that they're going to respond to your email very shortly, and then we'll give you a chance to post it on the screen. Okay, thank you. Next to speak to question is Lori. Hi, Lori, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Lori Rashi, her pronouns. Start just by acknowledging all the hard work Susan, you and many other community advocates have done around this issue, and just express my appreciation and gratitude that this is moving forward. As someone who works in public health, I think this is such important work. I just wanted to comment that I think it would be important to recognize in the review of the strategy to really acknowledge, as Susan's mentioned, the history and the harms of criminalization, particularly for Black and Indigenous communities. As Susan has noted, this is an important step, but there's a long way to go to undo the harms that have been done, and the very specific racism that's been embedded in the criminalization of drugs. And also, just to ask for, I guess, maybe what appears just on the basis of the presentation that you've given for a bit greater prominence of upstream factors that create the conditions for drug use. So poverty, lack of housing, that's indicated around barriers to employment, access to healthcare, for our community, stigma and discrimination in particular. So I just really like to see those pieces really foregrounded because I think that decriminalization is important, but addressing the social determinants of health is also very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lori. I think there might have been a question in there. So did you want to answer to that? To your question?
So I'm happy to have an answer to that, or to see this work come back to us and see how that's embedded.
Okay. Thank you, Lori. Thank you. Anyone else? Questions, comments? Jennifer, go ahead, please.
Hi, Alicia. Jennifer White, pronouns they, them. And I thank you again for the presentation. And I echo a lot of what my counterparts have indicated in their comments. Decades ago, it feels like now, I did participate in the Toronto drug strategy in a former life. And I really appreciate I think you indicated a component about, moving forward, should there be some youth-specific focus. And given that my background is working with young people, I really think there's a significant importance in really looking at providing and distinguishing with that particular group. We do a lot of components around housing supports, and I think one of the things that's really helpful for young people is to really have that looked at as a separate population. The level and types of supports and the factors that influence and impact our young people are significantly different. And so I think that would just be something to keep very separate and acknowledging moving forward around strategies to support our young people and especially our 2S LGBTQ+ young people. So.
Jennifer, thank you very much for those comments. Anyone else? Okay. Seeing none, I do have a motion, and if I can ask the clerk to provide some support and put it on the screen, I'll just go through it very quickly and also set my time here. The motion is to request the medical officer of health and the associate director of the Toronto Drug Strategy, Secretariat, to create a specific two-spirited LGBTQ drug strategy as a component of the Toronto drug strategy, to incorporate this committee's feedback into the creation of the strategy, and to do consultation with a whole host of organizations, which include Sherburne Health, the AIDS service organizations, the 519, and other service providers that are LGBT specific, to also create educational materials and campaigns as an objective of promoting sexual health as it relates to the strategy and ending stigma and discrimination that members of the community face, and to request the provincial and federal governments to invest in the development and the implementation of the strategy. I do recognize that this is probably a historic moment, and I just want to flag that, because the Toronto drug strategy, of course, has been now in conversation, in motion, and development and execution for well over a decade. And many of the members here have shown us that they have been involved with those conversations. I do not think, I recall, and perhaps I could be corrected later on if anybody's watching the screen, that I don't think we've ever really been able to dive deeply into an LGBT conversation around drug use, not in a formal advisory committee way. Our recommendations go to the executive committee, as you know, or to the appropriate standing committee, and then they go to city council. And I just want to mark this occasion because this is it's a pretty important day. I've been in council now for over, close to 11 years. And the first time I raised the issue around LGBT community and drug use, and in particular, to be quite honest, originally I was raising the issue of chemsex drug use and the sexual social context of drug use in our community with then Medical Officer of Health, Dr. McEwen. I then subsequently raised it again with Dr. Barbara Yaffe, and I then raised it again more recently with Dr. Eileen Davila, all three exceptional public health officials. And I would say that most of the response was, what do you want to do with it, Councillor? And I thought to myself, well, I'm not qualified to do anything with it. What I'd like you to do is put the attention and the energy and the talent of Toronto Public Health to this matter. You tell me as public health officials and experts what can be done by speaking to our community, because we already have the drug strategy, we have the urban drug strategy, we're funding age service organizations, we are going out there to fund community partners. How do we engage in this conversation? Which has, I believe, been largely under-discussed in our community, besides, of course, the coffee table chats. When we have been able to get together, we are speaking about this in drag bars, social settings, and of course conversations are happening in group sex environments and bathhouses. And this is a pretty darn large, important conversation that we really need to have as someone who represents the Church and Wellesley neighborhood, but also someone who is deeply committed to the community. And this conversation has got to be in a non-judgmental space. So even the fact that we're having this conversation in the House of Government right now is pretty powerful for me. It has to involve, in many ways, bringing our community together in a healing and safe space to dialogue and speak frankly about this issue, whether it's about chemsex, about methamphetamine, about drug, sort of club drugs, recreational drugs, poppers, crystal meth, all of those things that are so absolutely critical because people are coping and doing the best they can to cope with the difficulties and challenges of life, and sometimes they're self-medicating. And this is, to me, a very necessary and needed conversation because it also ties into sexual health, which is another area of study that our communities are underrepresented. And it would be a mistake for us to tie this back into a mental health conversation. Mental health and addictions have got to go hand in hand. So I recognize that the motion I've placed is probably just one of giving general direction. Alicia, thank you very much. I know you're brand new to the city, just a few days on the job, but we're going to be asking you to do this important lift for us and to bring in the community of stakeholders and experts, including people who are actual drug users, in our community in a safe space where they can tell you what's going on, where they're not going to be judged. And I think if you can do this, work with Toronto Public Health, then you're going to shift the dialogue in our community in a significant and structural way. And that means getting hospitals, institutions, health clinics, all to understand what our community needs, which I don't think has really happened, not in a holistic manner. Conversations have taken place around the margins, but then policies haven't really shifted. So I appreciate that the conversation came out of the decriminalization of drugs, and that is a very important piece, but we can't do that work without looking at the 4 pillars and how those 4 pillars apply to this specific community that has always had significant challenges, and one day we won't have those significant challenges, but that's not the day before us. So thank you very much, everyone, for the indulgence. I took a little bit extra time. Thank you. Susan, coming back to your motion, I believe you have a motion that might be ready now?
Just waiting for the city clerk or person to put it on the screen. The motion is there. Should I speak to it quickly?
Perfect.
See, now I'm hearing feedback.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for your motion, Susan. That's very helpful as well. Great work. We have the 2 motions on the screen. Are there any questions of the mover? Seeing none, is it okay for the committee if we take them as a package, we vote on them together? Yes? So all those in favor of the motions? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, so we're heading right along. Item number 5, Gender Equity Strategy. Kara Santoki, welcome to the screen. The floor is yours. You've got 10 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Chair, and good morning, everyone. It's really lovely to see so many familiar faces, and I'd also like to acknowledge that I know that many people on this committee have been on the journey alongside so many of us in Toronto to get to the place of having a gender equity unit. My name is Kara Santoki. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the manager of the Gender Equity Unit. And this morning, I'd like to give you an overview, a very brief, high-level overview of the work that we're currently doing and planning to do with the Gender Equity Strategy, which we hope that this committee body will also be very closely involved with. So I will share. Are people able to see this? Yeah, wonderful.
Yes, we can. If you want to get into presentation mode, yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
So the objective of this presentation today, flipping back to September 2019, at long last, we had a directive from City Council to create a gender equity strategy to address intersectional gender inequities in all municipal programs, services, and policies. So this morning, I'll give you a very quick overview of the goals of the strategy from the perspective of the City of Toronto, our progress to date, and as well as the timelines and delivery. So this is our team. You'll probably be getting to know us a lot better over the coming weeks and months. I would like to introduce my gender equity consultant, and her name is Farzana Khan. She is listening in today. If you'd like to give a little wave, Farzana. And so what do we mean by gender? For the purposes, I know this is a very important and much larger conversation, but just zooming into how we're going to work with this from the perspective of the Gender Equity Unit and the strategy, the socially constructed norms, behaviors, roles, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender diverse people. I'd like to emphasize as well, both for this community, this Council Advisory Board, and from the strategy perspective, that no one shall be excluded. This, of course, includes all members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community, as well as gender fluid people as well. And so most importantly, what we want to work with is the ways in which this conception of gender influences both our relationships with each other, the relationship that the city has with residents of Toronto, and the distribution of power and resources in our society. So to relate that back to the aim, overall aims of the gender equity strategy is an acknowledgement of how sex and gender norms intersect with other aspects of complex identities that people may have, and how these influence residents' access to Toronto's economic, social, and cultural benefits. The strategy will address all of these compound barriers faced by women, girls, and gender diverse residents, and help city divisions to develop equitable programs and policies in order to at least start the process of removing these barriers. And I know members of this committee will be very intimately familiar with the experience of having these barriers in place. Pardon me, I'm having technical difficulties switching my slide. There we go. There we are. So applying this to our key goals, as far as the Gender Equity Unit is going to be working on in the coming months and years, building staff capacity to apply an intersectional gender lens to municipal programs, services, and policies. Very importantly, doing the work of eliminating systemic inequities in key areas such as housing, transit, city planning, and gender-responsive budgeting. This is by no means an exhaustive list, though I'm sure other things will come up. And align the disaggregated data strategy with an intersectional gender equity lens. So to give you another view of what this work looks like as we've laid it out so far, the first stage being to conduct these public consultations. Secondly, aligning with the city's existing equity-related strategies, jurisdictional best practices, and key informant data. And I'd like to insert at this point that I've been listening very closely to all of the comments that committee members have made thus far this morning, and relating that back to existing equity-related strategies, to acknowledge that we do have strategies such as the senior strategy and the poverty reduction strategy, but many are still excluded and face barriers. And this is where we hope that the work of the gender equity strategy can intersect, to use that term, with these strategies to actually address, for example, the concerns of queer seniors or other residents or groups of parts of the population that may have been excluded so far. And finally, to put all of these things into action, build staff capacity to do this work of applying a gender equity lens, hopefully launch pilot projects, and continue in the coming years to build upon, improve on this work, and track and measure progress. And so what have we done so far in terms of progress to date? Completed jurisdictional scans and established international gender equity partnerships. I'm proud to say actually that the work of Toronto has already influenced some other jurisdictions. The city of Vienna, after consulting with Toronto, is now implementing their own reporting dashboard on gender equity goals. We've started the process of launching public consultations and key informant interviews, and Social Planning Toronto has been retained to help us with this work. Developed community partnerships that includes both community organizations and the populations that they serve. To this end as well, we also do have, in addition to our internal City of Toronto Equity Advisory Group, we have an external community advisory group that's specifically geared towards advising on the process of public consultations. I know we have some members overlapping with this group as well. And it also includes members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community. And finally, we've already done the work of establishing an interdivisional advisory committee so that we could bring the concerns of the public back to this committee to see what work we're able to accomplish immediately and what we need to plan for in city divisions in terms of applying a gender equity lens. And so this is a roadmap we originally laid out when this work, sorry, let me rephrase that. When the directive was passed by Council in 2019, Council asked for a report back in Q4 2021, which obviously we're currently in, but everything was severely delayed in this work because of the unexpected COVID-19 pandemic. We originally envisaged an extension to bring this work to City Council in June of 2022. And here you'll see the roadmap we've laid out in terms of public consultations and receiving strategy feedback. I'd like to insert here that it's really important for us as city staff to also get the feedback of this Council Advisory Board to tap into your expertise and vast experience to ensure that we're not missing anything in terms of what should be covered and what issues need to be addressed in the gender equity strategy. And finally, some discussions I hope will come up in members' comments and comments for discussion. Priority areas do you think we should consider? Perhaps there are some priority areas that may not be as obvious or would have come up in your experience over the years. And in particularly priority populations with complex intersecting identities, who is in most need of immediate assistance, as well as any other issues and gaps that we may have missed. going to stop sharing and say just in conclusion, we are also currently in the process of doing key informant interviews in addition to the public consultations. I'd like to invite any member of this committee who feels that they'd like to have a one-on-one conversation with the Gender Equity Unit in order to bring up any of these issues or concerns. We really would love to hear from you. We'd love to tap into your expertise, and we'd love your feedback and guidance. And with that, I will pass it back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Cara. Thank you for your presentation. I see hands going up already. This is great. Leslie, followed by Laura. Anyone else? Okay, we'll start with those two. Leslie, go ahead. You go first.
Thank you so much. My name is Leslie. You know, I'm still gender mysterious. It hasn't changed. Thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering if you're a Trini.
Yeah.
It's so nice to hear another Trini. It was a really good presentation. My suggestion is, again, when we're talking about intersectionality, to look at folks with disabilities and people of color. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leslie. Laura, and then followed by Susan.
Yeah, of course. So a little context is that I do, and I'm hearing echo. Okay, there we go. I do gender equity program design, so it's a bit of a passion place for me. I've got too much brain information. But one of the pieces that we are really careful about, and we're seeing more and more conversation around recently, is what is commonly referred to as the girl effect, in which gender equity actually focuses specifically on women and girls as if we're the problems. We're not. The systems and the people around us are the problems. And so if you're doing gender equity work, it needs to target the systems and the people that are oppressing women and girls. Women and girls aren't the issue. So an example of this is that I saw a project launch in which it was incredibly offensive for women coaches, teaching them how to communicate effectively to become leaders, which was very insulting. The idea that women didn't know how to communicate effectively, and that's why they weren't in leadership positions, is not the problem. It's not that. It's not that women can't communicate effectively. It's that men don't know how to listen to women's voices and the way in which we communicate. And so if you're going down the route of gender equity, what I would just say is there needs to be very intentional work and resources put towards the systems and the people who uphold systems of oppression versus just focusing on empowering women and girls. You can empower us all you want. We can't get anywhere if we're still being oppressed.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you. Chad, I see your hand, but before you go, I believe it's Susan next. Anyone else? Okay, Susan, go ahead, Chad, and then Ranjith.
Oh, I didn't realize I was not on mute, so I'm still using pronouns, folks. She, her pronouns. So I just made a few notes. So happy to see this presentation. My soul, I was going to say my brain, but maybe both my brain and my soul hurt when I see people describe gender equity in essentialist gender lens in essentialist terms as male and female. So I'm really glad to see that you have women and girls in there. And I'm really hoping that you can spread the tentacles. I know with all the support, staff support here, and Wong Tam's been such a great advocate for us at the city level, and I just like spread this to the city, because there are times when I self-identify for certain meetings, conventions, conferences, where I'm forced to identify as male or female, and neither of them work for me. I'm a trans woman. So multiple categories of identification, but you asked, I made a note, non-binary and so how does the non-binary, and if I missed it, apologize, because I I'm just reviewed the presentation with all us here. Didn't have a chance to pre-read it because I'm in another conference. But just if non-binary doesn't really fit into women and girls, and people have different, there is a definition for it. So I just wanted to indicate that. I'm also wondering, you don't have trans actually, but you've got gender diverse as a term. And so just wondering about the different, how do I say this? The variety of trans identities can be nuanced and complicated around understanding how we fit into policy. That's how I said it. And so if someone like me who is historical transitioner, I found out at a conference in the summer, who is quite binary, a trans woman, so if I can check those off. But there are people who have been along the gender diverse scale or the trans fluid scale, I'll say. I don't know if it's really a scale. It's an identity. It's our everyday lives. That probably affects more than just the women and girls. So those are just some of my comments. Thank you for doing this, and just way to go. Those are my comments for now.
Thanks, Susan. That was really helpful. Jad and then Ranjit.
Hi, Jad, he, they pronouns. Kara, just wanted to say family structures of newcoming immigrant households play a really big role in that. Specifically for my culture, for example, I remember witnessing a family that was about to immigrate to Toronto. I was in Beirut, and there was a social worker that was trying to vary out gender dynamics of that family for when they would come to Toronto. So he was addressing the father of the family household and saying, what are you going to do when you're in Toronto? Your daughter would like to date, or your wife is picking up a more rights-based narrative and is fighting. And I saw the reactions. Patriarchy is never pretty. Patriarchy is violent. And I completely agree with the stance that we should be focusing more on the elements of patriarchy that harm Global South and women from collectivist cultures, as much as we focus on empowering them. And I also just want to say that in my culture, if you're looking at gender dynamics, it's about what queers you. Queer is used in a verb term. So, for example, my mother uptook the social allocation of a queer person once she became a divorcee. And women in my culture, depending on issues of chastity, representation, issues of marriage and family formation, they become vulnerable and marginalized in different ways. So I think in looking at gender dynamics, it's important to be very culturally nuanced and see what really marginalizes women and girls depending on different cultures. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jad. Ranjit. And before Ranjit, before you speak, are there any other members who have questions or comments right now? Please let me know. And thank you, Terrence. I see your hand. Okay, go ahead, Ranjit.
Thank you. This is Ranjit, and I also identify myself as a gender bender. And this is so important that discussion on gender is taken up by the City of Toronto. And I would like to underscore the importance of understanding gender as a spectrum, as a fluid spectrum. I would give an analogy of a cloud. If you look at a cloud, those tiny drips of water would be gender in a cloud. There is no linear process. At one point male and the other point female, or at one point cis and the other point trans. It is a cloud. Gender is a cloud, a fluid, dynamic cloud. However, because of all the reasons from colonialism to settler colonialism, that we look at gender as a static binary, and then all forms of violence have been inserted. So this is where we can also be we can learn from many, many indigenous worldviews, cultures, and Laura is here, and how gender is understood in the indigenous world. Not only they are in so many different cultures and communities all over the world. And I want to highlight the importance of understanding gender as a fluid spectrum without any sense of linearity or a direct line, linear processing in that, because that is when we can understand the underlying violence within the formations of such binaries. I would like to also talk to you, Kara, about it one-on-one at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjit. Next to speak to question is Terrence.
Hello, and thank you. Not going to be long, because most folks already mentioned everything that I was thinking. And to speak to the systemics and how that affects this whole thing. It's kind of like, don't change the individual, change the problem is not the individual, the problem is the community, is the environment. And I do some work, but I also, my partner does a lot of work with like the PAR program, domestic abuse, and this consistently comes up. And a lot of conversations with her and a lot with the youth that I work with, toxic masculinity is a major cause of what people go through. And it's like this set bar that typically, like you have cisgendered men, and then we're on top of that, you got like white cisgendered men, right? That's an intersectionality because you'll find different variations. But yeah, that toxic masculinity is really what tends to feed a lot of gender expectations and roles and privileges that we as society disseminate or remove from people. So that's I think a major focus that should happen. And to lend to that I think would also contribute to dealing with a lot of other issues. When you see that issue will intersect with other things. So it's not just we will be supporting other genders, but looking at male identified individuals, it's gonna be affecting just even those folks as well, and in turn many of these other issues that we've been discussing throughout this whole meeting. So I think toxic masculinity is a very, very deep rooted issue, and it affects almost and permeates many issues within our society. So I think that's a great focus. But yeah, I think checking my notes. Otherwise, all the other things have already been covered. Great. So that's the only thing.
Terrence, thank you very much for those comments. Anyone else? Okay. Jennifer, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Just a very quick comment. I just wanted to highlight if there's somewhere we can do a bit of a priority population. I'm thinking, if we're talking about equity, I know a lot of the young people I work with who identify as Black woman trans is a priority group that is really discriminated against. And so there needs to be a lot more work done there.
Jennifer, thank you very much. And Kara, I see your hand up, so you probably want to speak and answer some questions, I think.
Yeah. So this is just very quickly to say to Jennifer, can we please connect in the near future? Because I'd love to hear more of those voices in our consultations. And just to reiterate that I've heard all of your very good and very valid comments, and that will certainly be taken back with us into consideration.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kara. Anyone else? I don't see any more hands. Oh, sorry, Samantha. Hi, Samantha. Go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Samantha. My pronouns are they and she. And listening to everyone speak, one of the things that I thought was missing are femmes, Black trans femmes. I'm a femme myself, and that's a population that experiences a lot of violence that hasn't been included. And Black trans femmes are folks that I interact with constantly with my project Black Femme Legal. And so I would also love to connect with you, Kara, about this as well.
Thanks, Samantha. Cara, I think you've got a lot of enthusiastic members who want to participate in the discussion, so thank you. This is great. If there's no other members with comments or questions, I think I'm going to just maybe wrap up. I do have a motion. The motion is fairly straightforward. It is to request that you incorporate this committee's feedback into the creation of your gender equity strategy for the city. And Cara, thank you very much. I know that this is going to be a very significant body of work for the City of Toronto. We've never had a gender equity strategy, despite the fact that women and girls, non-binary people make up more than 52% of the population, and I just think that it is so critically important that we take an intersectional, inclusive gender approach to how we design programs and services at the city. Otherwise, we're missing out on reaching 52% of that population at minimum. I do want to recognize, and maybe I can sum up, I think what the members have said and said it so brilliantly is really getting to the root causes of addressing patriarchy and misogyny. And of course, misogyny can take place in many different ways, but we also recognize that there are some bodies that experience more violence disproportionately than others. Whether it's Black trans individuals, Black trans women in particular, seniors and so forth. We can just go on. But I think my direction to you and the request is that you make sure you have that intersectional gender lens as you move through your work. And I know that because this strategy is going to guide the city in how we develop new programs and services, the apex of every single policy tool in any order of government is the budget. How we spend our money will tell you what we value, who we care about, and who we don't. We are a city that is experiencing tremendous growth. You see it through the intensification of just the skyline of the city changing. There's tremendous pressure on the TTC. There is tremendous pressure on all our parks and social services, and billions of dollars are literally being spent every single year to make this city run and make the city, hopefully, a great place to live, work, invest, and study. We have a $14 billion operating budget and a $40 billion capital budget. I want to make sure that your work, this new gender equity strategy for the city, is going to be directing and guiding that work that council does. Otherwise, we're building a city for just half the population. And I don't think that's the intention, which is why your work is so critical. So if there's a way to benchmark and to measure outcomes year after year, I think one of the things that I'd like to see with the gender equity strategy is to make sure that you have annual benchmarks. How many people that you're designed to try to uplift out of poverty are actually uplifted out of poverty? How many people who identify in this category that actually get housing? Are they gaining access to employment that is meaningful and well paid, to be quite honest, because it's a very expensive city? Who's getting access to housing? Who's getting access to programs? Who's getting access to recreation services? Who's getting access to contracts and supplier vendor contracts at the city? Who are we rewarding all our money to? Is how I would like to think that your strategy can guide council's work. It's a tall order because you have to get the support and buy-in from all the divisions. And that means that, the city manager's office, the mayor's office, the executive committee, all of those chairs have got to champion the equity, the gender equity strategy. So I know that this is not just about asking you and your small unit to do this work. There is political power that has to come from this committee and the community that's invested in your work that then propels this forward so city council can't ignore it. So I just want to say thank you in advance for all that you're doing. I do recognize that Harmony Mendoza from the Women Abuse Council was supposed to speak. She's not here at this moment. And I just want to draw everyone's attention to the fact that Harmony was asking that we defer basically give Cara and her unit more time to do the consultation. And just so publicly we have this on the record, and I'll say it, is that I've made the request to Cara's boss to see if the report that is due to council can be extended 1 month. And I think that there's a desire to get this done before the council basically recesses for the summer and the election cycle. So even though Harmony's not with us, I just wanted to acknowledge that we received her communication and trying to advance her request. I don't know if we can defer it 3 months, that's probably too long, but certainly I think we can make that accommodations for at least a 1 month, 30-day, 45-day cycle. Thank you very much. There's only one motion. It's fairly straightforward. I didn't want to receive the presentation. I wanted to sort of give it some teeth. So all those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, team. Okay, committee, you're doing great. Last item, which is QS 4.6, Equity Lens Tool Modernization. That's a mouthful. Welcome to the committee, Janice.
Thank you all. Good morning. Yes, it is a tongue twister. Thank you, everyone, and good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all and share with you our work on the Equity Lens tool. As many of you know, my name is Janice Alvarez. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the manager of the Equity Unit. I'm a brown woman with long black hair that's currently tied in a bun, and with hoop earrings and wearing a green sweater. I will now turn it over to my colleague and co-presenter to introduce herself.
Thank you, Janice, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon now. My name is Srijoni Raman. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a brown South Asian woman with long black hair wearing a black top, and I'm so excited to be here today and virtually meet you all. Back over to you, Janice.
Perfect. So I just want to make sure, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So just to provide some upfront context. So while equity has always been a priority for the city, at this moment in time, it has really come to the forefront of the conversation. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and other recent events, it is more important than ever that the city focus on building equity capacity across the organization. We are seeing many divisions have both an increased awareness of equity issues as well as the desire to address them. This focus on equity is also very much aligned with public discourse and the expectations of residents have of the city. So to support this goal, there's an opportunity to review and refresh the city's Equity Lens tool to drive continuous improvement and to support evolving needs that align with best practice. So our team is now exploring the next iteration of our Equity Lens tool in an effort to improve usability, impact, and sustainability. So today's presentation will provide more information on the history of the Equity Lens tool, highlight some of the key features through a brief demo, and outline some of the next steps in our modernization journey. So to begin, I will start by sharing a bit of the background and history of the tool. So in 2005, the tool was developed by the Roundtable on Access, Equity, and Human Rights, a council advisory body such as yourself, in collaboration with city staff. In 2006, the tool was implemented as a pilot project focusing on reports submitted by the city manager's office. In 2009, the tool was then expanded to apply to all significant reports from all city divisions. And in 2018, what was a paper-based tool was then migrated to an electronic platform that's housed on the internal site of the city, the intranet. And in 2019, a number of trainings were rolled out to support the staff in using this online tool. Then in 2021, our team engaged in some user research conducted to gather feedback to inform the modernization of the tool in understanding how people are using it and how it can better serve divisional needs to meet and address barriers facing residents of Toronto. So what is the Equity Lens tool? The Equity Lens tool is an important part of the city's broader equity infrastructure and is designed to, one, diagnose the root causes of inequity and identify barriers and appropriate accommodations to yield better outcomes. It is also designed to measure and evaluate the equity impact of policy, services, and programs to identify strengths and areas for improvement, as well as train users on how to conduct equity impact assessment and integrate a fuller equity analysis into their planning and decision making. And finally, the tool is intended to build a common understanding of equity and cultivate a community of practice. Now, this is a very iterative tool. It's still a work in progress. Some of these pillars have better been realized more than others, but this is why we're on the journey for iteration and continuous improvement to address any of the gaps that exist. So with that, rather than talk about the tool theoretically, let me actually quickly pull up the tool so that you can see it in action. So as I mentioned, the tool is housed on the city's intranet page and is available to city staff within our divisions. So it's a quick login, and as you enter, it has a repository of all of the previous statements that you have worked on. So it's kind of, you can archive it and you can work on it at your own leisure and kind of save your changes and have that kind of repository at the back end. So as you enter the tool, this is the page that you see. As you scroll up, you'll see that it starts with situating you with some broad tips for conducting your equity analysis. We also have on the side some broad guides that help support an equity understanding, such as a glossary and a fact sheet that helps situate people, recognizing that not all folks may have the same baseline understanding of equity going into the tool, so providing some of that common knowledge. We then have a number of resources on the tool, including now we've made the addition of additional COVID-19 resources, acknowledging that certain communities have faced disproportionate impacts and barriers due to the pandemic. So really highlighting those and pointing them out so they can be embedded into analysis. We also have other city commitments and strategies that folks can link their initiatives back to, as well as some data sets, including some demographic information, some neighborhood information. But this is one of the areas that is currently under review, that we want to do a more thorough inventory of what resources exist around the city, how we can better theme or classify them so that they're more easily accessible and readily available to city staff to use in their analysis. You'll also see that we have some contact information for our office so that we're able to support in consultations and advice where people run into any barriers. So this is where we get to the interesting part of the tool. As you can imagine, the city has very many diverse lines of business, from solid waste management to public health to transportation to shelters. So there's no way that one tool can answer everyone's questions or provide all the answers to everyone's initiatives. So instead, what the tool is designed to do is to provide reflective and prompting questions so that we ensure that people are asking the right questions at the beginning of their planning stages and their initiatives, so they're embedding these considerations into their work. So we have 6 steps along this process, which is identifying impacted communities, assessing the needs and barriers of those communities, assessing what the impact of your initiatives are on those needs and barriers, identifying the level of the impact, then where there is a negative impact, identifying a mitigation strategy, and ultimately culminating in what we call an equity impact statement. So you'll see in each of these areas, there are a number of reflective questions that we have to prompt folks to kind of reflect on. And then we also have a number of tips in order to describe how you would engage in that level of analysis. So for example, in identifying communities, it's very easy for the City of Toronto or programs to say, you know, everyone is impacted in the city. But what we're talking about in an equity analysis, for example, is a differential impact. If it impacts everyone in the exact same way, then that's not an equity analysis. We're looking at how it impacts particular Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving groups and the unique barriers or unique needs that they have, and then how that unique barrier and need is interacting with that initiative that is different from other communities or the broader residents of Toronto. So there's a lot of these reflective questions along the way, and these are all, as I mentioned, meant to be iterative. This is not meant to be static. So all of these are under review, and we're looking to how we can constantly revise and improve the outputs. After folks have kind of, and this is not meant to be a one-time, like you visit it, you've done your equity analysis in half an hour. Equity analysis needs to be done over time. It requires research and it requires due diligence on the part of our divisions. So once kind of this background contemplation and research is done, then you then move on to actually engaging with the tool. So we have a number of these fields that are active fields. I've pre-populated with a bit of a dummy example. This is not anything real life that we're working on right now, at least our office isn't. And so basically you'll see that these fields are active fields. So just below, whatever I populate in these fields, it auto-generates an equity impact statement below. So just before I go into that auto-generation, I'll just quickly touch on what exactly is an equity impact statement. So equity impact statements can be used in a number of ways. They can be used during the planning phase just to kind of scope out who we're talking about, what the needs and barriers are, but more tangibly, they can be included in reports to council, as well as into the equity responsive budgeting process. Any changes to our operating budget, so that's enhancements, efficiencies, or reductions, are required to have an equity impact statement to outline what impact that initiative has on equity. So these generated statements help to support that. But as I mentioned, actually I didn't mention, but this is not an AI tool. This is not an algorithm or a smart tool. It's really an input-output tool. So the output is as good as the analysis of the input that you put in here. So this area has a space for you to name your initiative, the type of policy, is it a policy, project, program, strategy, and then fill in a description and some, if it's related to any other city strategies, so that we're rolling it up into that. And then that helps to pre-populate below. This is where we get to the really interesting part of the tool as well. So we have identified, and mind you, we realize that this is not necessarily an exhaustive list, so this is something that we're always looking to refine and improve, but we've identified 10 Indigenous, Black, and equity deserving groups. So you can go into each group, and for each group, there's further information about each group. A lot of this information right now, we're undergoing an update because we realized that these community profiles were a little bit dated. So we are working with our subject matter experts across the organization to help to update this, such as the Poverty Reduction Office confronting anti-Black racism, the Indigenous Affairs Office to update these respective profiles. And also we are going to be having new census data next year that we're hoping to include in this tool as well. So there's further information on each of these communities. And there's a drop-down menu that includes some specific barriers and needs that those communities may be facing. And it gives you an opportunity to describe what the potential impacts of your initiative is on that particular community, as well as the level of impact, whether it's high, medium, or low, positive, or negative. And there's guides to how that is kind of determined. It's not exactly a science, but it's a bit more of an art. But there's parameters that we try to provide guidance to divisions. And then finally, we really encourage that intersectional analysis, recognizing that, for example, women can be a very broad category, but let's actually drill down. Are we talking about Black trans women that may be disproportionately impacted within a particular initiative? Are we talking about racialized immigrant youth within a particular initiative? To really drill down within these 10 broader categories to provide that intersectional analysis. You'll also notice that previously only a couple of the communities were required, but due to COVID-19, we've actually made all of these fields required. So what we are advising divisions is that often our initiatives can have unintended or unforeseen consequences. So we're encouraging divisions to cast a wide net, consider the impacts to any and all communities. And we don't expect that initiatives would impact any and all, but we want you to do your due diligence and do that analysis so you can say, no, this is not a direct impact of this community. And then you can simply click in and say, none. And that then the analysis is complete. But we want that contemplation to be done. Oh, kick me up. We want that contemplation to be done to ensure that folks are at least considering what those impacts might be. to those communities. And then once you have completed the analysis for all 10 communities, you can go down and a statement is auto-generated. One thing that I would like to share is that, as I mentioned, this is an input-output tool. So it's really very, I would say it's a skeleton outline. We encourage folks to take this away as almost a framework, add in a bit more of that narrative, add in some more data, add in a bit more of that color to that narrative. But this is a starting point that can help support your equity analysis as you take it away through a council report or through the budgeting process or any other of your planning initiatives. So with that, I will hand it over to my colleague Sejoni to take you through some of our envisioned enhancements to the tool.
Thank you so much, Janice. Oh, I think I'm hearing the echo. Okay, that's fine now. So now that you know what the current tool looks like, we can take a slightly deeper dive into the vision for modernizing the tool. So why are we modernizing the tool? I wanted to start by providing a bit of context on the very different pieces that are informing our vision for this modernization. So as Janice mentioned, the online version of the tool has existed for about 3 years, and earlier in 2021, we collected user research which identified what's working for the tool as well as some key opportunities to improve the usability and impact of the tool. As a part of the internal context as well, we're exploring ways to better embed equity and reconciliation across city processes, and the tool is a key avenue to support the integration of equity and reconciliation considerations across portfolios. We also recognize that Indigenous communities have unique experiences that are beyond equity as a result of colonialism, and there are opportunities and a need to better embed Indigenous experiences, cultures, and histories within the tool and to advance reconciliation and support the organization to do the same. And then at a macro level, as Janice touched on, the equity landscape is one that evolves rapidly, and even just in the last 3 years, there's been a lot of contextual changes at large as well, namely COVID-19, which has highlighted for us the importance of embedding equity and reconciliation deep within our systems from the get-go so that we can return to a new normal and also recover equitably, especially given the disproportionate impact that the pandemic has had on Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving communities and what it has exposed and amplified. So all of these context and considerations is what is helping us inform and shape our vision for the refresh so that the tool can really be a platform or a hub of learning and resources to support the city to embed and advance equity and reconciliation across all stages of their project. Next slide, please, Janet. Thank you. So the tool is a key part of our equity infrastructure. And as Janice mentioned, it is being heavily used now for the equity impact statement. So modernizing it, as well as providing supports to better embed equity, requires a certain level of culture change as well. And so we have put some thought to this and have created a suite of supports to ensure the integration of the tool and to support the organization through the modernization process. So how will we drive this change? Well, the slide lists the key 4 components that we hope to use to do this. The first component is creating learning resources and making updates to the tool to build capacity, to make it more user-centric, and to ensure that the experiences of communities and their lived experiences are really centered in decision-making. So we will do this through things like user guides and community profiles and updating the content on the site to ensure that staff have capacity to advance equity and reconciliation and barriers facing Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving groups, and that the work and policies are responsive to that, to their experiences. As well, we're looking to track progress and measure progress and inform the tool through continuous improvements that we informed by user feedback. So as Janice mentioned, we see this as being a very iterative process, so using our learnings to keep further refining the tool as we go along. And then communications and engagement. So working across areas to increase awareness and ensuring that staff have capacity to use the tool effectively and to promote that culture shift and change. So this piece is really focused on both socializing the tool, but also ensuring that the tool is being used effectively, that there's uptake of the tool. The tool can exist, but to ensure that staff have the capacity to use the tool to its full potential. As Janice mentioned, your output is as great as the analysis that you do up front. to really supporting them, to supporting staff with their analysis to ensure that that analysis is strong and responsive. And lastly, accountability. So looking at existing reporting and planning structures and working towards making equity a requirement and not just an afterthought or a consideration, but ensuring that equity is something that is applied consistently, almost like a permanent lens, not a lens that you can take off across all the work that is happening in the state. So we are striving very much here to make a culture shift, and we know that that takes time. But these are some of the mechanisms that we are working towards to drive this. So as Janice mentioned again, this is an iterative process. So this is just a snapshot of our timeline and the key milestones that we are working with right now. So this process is not really meant to happen in isolation with just our team. Our team administers the tool, but equity is the responsibility of everyone. And we hope to house the information and engage with our partners in the organization, as well as and rely on their expertise and house all of the resources and information that we have and engage with them on an ongoing basis. So currently, if you look at the timeline, we are on Q4 of this year. So we're currently working with our partners to make some key content updates to the site. This includes things like case studies to demonstrate good equity work and learn and share key learnings from other areas, as well as updating community profiles and research on the site. And then beginning next year, we are hoping to start to build a new iteration of the tool, so some sort of a prototype, looking to our partners to get their feedback and informing iterations of that, and then moving towards launch towards end of next year. And it doesn't end there. We're then hoping to continue to gather user feedback, track and monitor our progress, and return to phase one again and make any content updates. So it's really not so much a linear process as much as a circular iterative process. And we want to ensure that the tool is one that is agile and also responsive to the changing context of the organization, of communities, and of society at large. And so with that, I am happy to move this into discussion. We have a few questions here today, and we would love your thoughts on some opportunities that you see to further improve the tool and to better embed experiences of communities within it. And also if there are other tools or best practices that the city can leverage to strengthen the equity lens, or tools that we can learn from to inform our process, and also any other thoughts you might have. So thank you. And again, it's really nice to virtually meet you all.
Thank you both, Janice, as well as Srijoni. This is a very full presentation, and I think that you have pulled the curtain back so that the committee members can see what exactly does equity work look like at the city. So thank you for that. I have not seen that before, so I think this is a bit of a treat, to be quite honest. I just want to recognize the time, folks. It is 12:33. This is our very last item of the agenda, and I was told by the clerk, just so anyone is asking or wondering, that we probably do not need a motion to extend to finish the matter, so we can finish this item without moving a motion to extend. I know, Councillor Ainsley, I had the same reaction myself, so apparently we are procedurally all aligned. So I guess there are three questions that the staff have placed before us. Who would like to provide some comments first? Or you might all be running low on sugar. Leslie, you are not running low on sugar. You go ahead first. Thank you. You're still on mute, Leslie.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very thorough. I'm just going to make one quick comment and then I have to leave. I'm finding that when I'm doing work with the city, because I'm on another working group with the city, the language is not very accessible. And that's my, the only feedback I have in terms of how you're framing things and when you're putting it out there, to try and make the language that you're using as simple and as accessible as possible, because Toronto is a very diverse city and you have many citizens who do not have English as a first language. So that's my key piece of feedback. But otherwise, your work is incredible, and thank you for doing what you do. And I have to go. Bye.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you. Nice to have you. And Leslie, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, all of the above. Okay.
Same to everybody.
Anyone else? I see Susan's hand, and any other members, please indicate your interest in speaking. Susan Ranjith. Susan first.
Oh, yeah, I'll try to be under the time limit because we are going into lunch period, but thank you for the presentation. Feeling a little guilty for speaking on every item here today, but this goes to show you just how well this committee is structured, how much I appreciate being part of the committee and having a chance to contribute with all you lovely folks. My comment is around, I looked on the presentation quickly. I didn't see it, but I thought I saw it in your presentation to the committee, the one I received previous to today. And there was a line about intersectionality. So this is where I'm going to come from on this. That, let me try it. We're talking about racialized and indigenous and two-spirit and use an intersectional analysis. I'm doing this without, I'm glad you're nodding, with 2S LGBTQ. And I find that that approach has been really effective for me. It brings more people in of all the equity committees, because sometimes we separate out equity committees from racialized and indigenous communities. So you're nodding. And the other thing I was just going to read, I don't, because of time, but I think what I've also learned is the word intersectionality is bantered about a lot or discussed without really looking at what its definition is. And so I'm not going to give those to you now. I can maybe send them to the clerk, but I have been, because I find that when I talk about it, I've read some of the background materials, maybe not as much as you have because you're super fantastic and fabulous, but that a lot of people I work with hear the word but don't understand the depth of its meaning. So those are my comments. Thank you for everything, and I'll let you go to the next speaker. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan. Ranjith.
Thank you. And yes, I echo the sentiments, and this is a fantastic report, presentation. Congratulations. Thank you so much for bringing this to limelight. To me, the importance of equity is that now at the city level, at the structural level, we understand and we recognize that inequalities exist. Injustices are systemic. That is the number one importance for me of going for an equity-based approach. And equity, essentially, equity leads to equality, perhaps to liberation. So equity is not a destination, but the beginning point to destination, the start point for destination, which is equality leading to liberation. So that's the other important thing I want to highlight that came out from your report. The other important thing is when we talk about equity, it's important, I think, not to center or recenter positions of privileges or exalted positions. Starting from, for example, like ableism, whiteness, or cisgenderism, and so on. Leslie wrote the very important dimension of language. And I want to add that I don't know whether at the city level it is the policy that when we conduct meetings that we have ASL interpreters, English ASL interpreters, and it is so important to embrace deafness, for example, as a culture, not as a disability, as a culture. And that is something I learned from Ontario Association of the Deaf. People, that was a huge learning curve for me, and ever since. So it is so important for us to understand those. And intersectionality, again, is not about, not the sense of diversity and inclusion, which are highly corrupted words and terms that are, I would challenge them as in some ways recentering whiteness. No, it's not that. It's decentering whiteness or any other similar privileged positions. So intersectionality, everybody is an intersectional being. It's not just a black person or racialized person or a trans person or older person. We all are in this. Intersectionality is all of us, and we are all intersectional. Thank you again. Thanks.
Thank you, Ranjit.
Thank you, Ranjit. And getting the grid back so I can see everybody's beautiful faces. Anyone else to speak? Questions? No more? Okay. Just to, I guess to, oh, Laura, hi. I saw your hand. Go ahead, please.
Great. It's a very last minute question. We know that this is meant to be online, user-friendly, all the lovely things that we love in the world, that I love in the world. But is it possible to move through this tool via phone still, like phoning someone to move through it? I only ask just because a lot of, at least my community, the Indigenous community, still likes to do applications via a conversation with a real human. And so if we're trying to access the Indigenous community, especially Indigenous elders, I think that that's necessary. It's something to consider.
Sorry, if I can just quick. So this is actually a tool meant for city staff. It's not a community tool. So, there is an assumption, but to your point, we also recognize that there are some city staff that may not have, like for example, in our agencies and corporations that may not have access to the internet. So there is a paper-based version of the tool to help support that analysis as well.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I just know that, like, I just imagine my mother within the city system trying to get through it and me being like,
and that's exactly why we've also built in like our contact information and provide those services and consultations, because we do realize that there are varying degrees of understanding in that equity journey.
Okay.
Fantastic. Anyone else? And seeing no more hands, Janice, I would like to, thank you to the committee members for their comments. I'd like to move that we receive the presentation and to Janice and the team with our thanks. I offer you a couple things. Number one, what an exceptional body of work that you folks are doing. I think that there are probably many organizations, institutions, big government that really needs to think about how do they deploy equity in the work that they do, especially when they're serving members of the public. I don't know what equity lenses look like or equity tools look like for other institutions and other corporations, but I am hell of impressed with what the City of Toronto has been striving for. And the fact that you're moving away from paper, bravo. It's probably long overdue. I imagine all the staff are saying, finally, it's a drop-down menu. That's great. I do want to offer you a few things to consider as you refine the tool, and I know it's an involving body of work. Number one, how do you avoid making these statements generic? And I know that you're drawing from a template, which I think is important because council, at the end of every report, just so the members know, when standing committees and council meets, we receive staff reports. At the end of every staff report is an equity statement, which is generated from the tool that you've just seen. How the heck do we make it not look like it was just rubber stamp? So therefore, the staff check the box, or then in this case, they drop down a menu and check the box. And so I think I'm going to offer you maybe 3 suggestions. It should be as accurate as possible based on population data and who the end users are going to be. And right now, having the statistics sort of the statistics beside it from the census, I think is important, but I would go further and drill down into population subsets. So if we're dealing with transportation and buses and streetcars, who exactly is getting on those streetcars? Who's getting on those buses? And when you talk about service cuts or service enhancements, who's benefiting and who is not? So therefore, it becomes even more accountable to the, I guess, to council's direction as we expand strategies, as we ask staff to develop these plans. And then finally, I think this committee is going to get to know me very well, that I like to talk about the budget a lot. And I talk about the budget a lot simply because it really is the only thing that drives services at the city. Without a line item attached to it, it really is just a motherhood apple pie statement, which means nothing to the person that's been waiting for housing or the person that's trying to get a parent into long-term care facilities or even accessing daycare. Janice, I know that the equity budgeting strategy has got to be integrated into your work, but I want to ask, and this is, you don't have to answer, but just think about how you're doing this. I think that what I'd like to leave you with as a final thought is, how do you make sure that equity budgeting and gender equity budgeting, intersectional gender equity budgeting, is going to be embedded not just in terms of strategic direction across the corporation, but also into services and programs. So therefore, at the end of the day, the meat and potatoes that every resident of Toronto expects from us is services and programs. They might not know that it's a strategic direction. They just know, can I get my kid into recreation programs? Is there enough support for my family and child? Why does it take so long for a noise bylaw officer to come out when someone beside me is making too much noise? And so that's the kind of stuff I think we need to the equity budgeting, the equity tool to respond to. So therefore, when the staff report comes out, it also tells councillors, this is the strategy. Now, in order for us to get this strategy into the hands of anybody and everyone who needs it, it's going to cost you this much money so we can deliver the program that's driven by the strategy. So I'll leave my comments there and to say thank you. We have a motion before the committee to receive the report. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. There's just going to be a little bit of housekeeping, so bear with me. I do recognize that we do have a speaker that came to speak to the gender equity strategy. I recognize that she was not able to join us. Harmony Mendoza, if you're still there, I want you to know that we've run out of time to sort of bring you back on the floor, but also the fact that we have adopted that item. There was a recommendation that was moved, and we did acknowledge there was from your organization and through your leadership to give the staff more time for consultation, and those conversation is sort of underway at the city. So just publicly acknowledging once again that that this committee has received information that we could ask staff to report to City Council on the gender equity strategy in July rather than June. So there's an advancement of time for about 30 to 45 days, but not 3 months, which I believe is your request. And then finally, we do have some members who we missed because they weren't able to join us today. So we have a motion to excuse them because they weren't here. So we have a motion to excuse Ashante Frey, Burka Gupta, as well as J.C. Elijah Bawa from the December 8th meeting of this committee. And if I can have the screen back, all those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. And then finally, this is our very last meeting, folks. Traditionally, sometimes as chair, I'd like to host season gatherings and holiday parties. This is not an opportunity for us to do so, and I really regret that because I'd love to see you folks in person. I am hoping, and I know Councillor Ainsley feels the same way, I can see him nodding, is that in 2022, when we do hopefully come back into this room, I would love to be able to host a lunch so we can have a little bit of time to get to know each other, just knowing that we can't do it right now in December. So I want to say thank you to all of you and your contributions. This has been a wonderful start to our committee work, and I'm sad that there's only 2 more meetings ahead of us in 2022, but I'm very confident that we'll do the very best we can to basically drive the conversation at the city with your leadership and your ongoing support. So to the committee members, thank you very much. Have a very safe holiday, a Merry Christmas, and everything else that you're celebrating. Please take care of each other, and I hope to bump into you either at the shopping mall or perhaps just about anywhere, in any village, in any community. Please be safe. Thank you, staff.
Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays to everybody. Merry Christmas.
Okay.
Have a good one.